All right, call this meeting to order. Oh, and I did it as you were giving me something. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Saper,
Here.
Councilmember Tull,
Here.
Councilmember Smith,
Here.
Councilmember Fitzgerald,
Here.
Councilmember Alvarez,
Here.
Councilmember Clark,
Here.
Councilmember Stokes is absent, Councilmember Todd.
Here.
Next item is Pledge of Allegiance. This evening will be led by Councilmember Saper. Moving right along, we got the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Councilmember Smith.
So I want to throw something out to the council, and this will be, I believe, open for discussion. I'm not sure how this works, but
Yes.
item 14. So when I heard that Councilmember Stokes was going to be out, I know she's been following this very closely from my time with the Planning Commission. And so I reached out to get her thoughts, and she told me that they had actually considered cutting a family vacation in Oregon short to fly back to be here for this meeting because she feels so strongly about this item 14. And so it seems like this is an issue that's important enough to have a full dais for. So I would like to request to move it to a meeting where we could have the full council present.
Further discussion. Councilmember Toll.
I think there's an item on there that's pretty time sensitive, so I would like to have the discussion tonight.
Further conversation. I mean, in general, I guess we never know who's going to be at any meeting at any time. It's my understanding there's going to be people absent next meeting, and I'm not sure down the road. So, I mean, we could perpetually run into a similar issue, and we are at 7. It's not like we're at 5. So, I mean, I would recommend moving ahead if council so desires.
So I'll
Is there
try a motion and see if I get a second. If not, that's fine. So I would move to remove short-term, or item 14 from this agenda for future discussion.
Second.
All in favor, please say yes.
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 Opposed, no.
No.
The motion fails. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Move to approve?
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say yes.
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 Opposed, say no.
No.
Motion carries. Next item, ceremonial matters. There are none this evening. Next item after that, number 6, comments from the public. Anyone from the public, please? Good evening.
Good evening. My full name is Cheryl Ann Ufinger. You need my address. It's 1603 Northeast Clubhouse Drive, North
you.
Kansas City, Missouri. And it's my understanding I can speak on more than one topic in my 5 minutes.
Correct.
Okay, I've been a resident of Clay County since 1973. I moved to this city in 2009. And at the time, I was still working full-time downtown, the government district, and I chose to move here because I thought it was a livable place, that I would have good access to public transit. And when it came time to not get a new car, I didn't because of public transit. And I rent a car every once in a blue moon. Well, first of all, and this is somewhat of a side issue, it has to do with the bike lanes. I think the bike lanes are a wonderful idea for exercise, but I just don't think it's a good use of taxpayer money and effort, thinking people are going to use a bicycle to get to work when you need a shower, shampoo, the whole thing, if you're going to go more than 2 or 3 blocks. But that's not the real reason I'm here this evening. It's to talk about the Metroplex, the abolishment of the Metroplex, and this IRIS. And I have to say some of the very in poor taste jokes have been calling it ISIS because it has been so disastrous. Today was the first day that I was able to even book a ride, and then my pickup time was at 1:30, 1:45. They show up around 2:15, and I understand I can be running late. They did not have me on the schedule, even though I called in twice to make sure I was. But the driver was very courteous. He picked me up. It took me an hour and a half to get from Sunny Hills to the library. And an hour and a half after that, I get a phone call from Iris saying, "Oh, we're sorry we didn't pick you up at 1:30. Do you still want that ride?" I said, I went where I wanted to be. I'm fine, thank you. I hope your system gets improved. And the past few days in calling Iris, I found out something rather disturbing. The call center is in Idaho. They have no concept of the city limits of North Kansas City. The driver today didn't even know North Kansas City has a library. They also talked, in talking with at least 4 or 5 customer representatives at the number that we were given on the flyer for Iris, and I pointedly asked, "Your call center's in Idaho. Are you in Idaho? Where are you in the world?" And they never would answer, and they all had very thick accents I would associate with people who live in India. And I don't mind people around the world getting jobs. I want them to understand English, that I can understand, they can understand me. I don't like the fact that people here in town at the call center lost their jobs or where they were assigned to have something sent, Lord knows where in the world. So I hope to heaven something is done, because this is dangerous. And when they were going to pick me up originally, they said, "We can't, even though they're going right by it, we can only drop you by a block and a half away." And talking with a young lady who works over at North Kansas City Hospital, she said it was the first time she was able to schedule anything, and she was going to be late for work because they were running so late. So I think the decisions to get rid of Metroplex were foolish. And that's the nicest word I can think of. And I think it's detrimental, it's unhealthy. I think that having the short time also, when Metroplex hours were shortened, it meant if you wanted to go to a restaurant in North Kansas City, you're eating supper at 5. And to me, that's somebody living in a nursing home. I'm not there yet. And it just really cut down on a lot of people being able to be out and about in North Kansas City. So first of all, do something, I don't know what, about Iris, and if there's any way possible, at least expand the weekday hours to at least 7. So.
Thank you. Further public comments? Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Number one, I want to thank the Public Works Department for the great job they did this morning with the storm. I was amazed how quickly they were out and taking care of things. Number two, regarding the bike lanes, I've sent my comments to my council people. I don't know why we're spending all this time on it. It seems like to me we got better things to do but talk about bike lanes. Number 14, short-term rentals. I have to compliment the Planning Commission on what I feel is a very thorough job in researching and coming up with a reasonable program for the short-term rentals. Yeah, I could sit here and pick on this item or that item, but I'm not going to. I think it's a really good program, and I think it needs to be passed and put into effect as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comments? Good evening.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. And by the way, Jesse, I've got 3 things. I might be 505. Number one, I want to make a comment of the proposed water rates and the Bike Master. I've talked to several of the seniors, and they don't understand it. And I was wondering if there's any way possible, they watch Channel 2, if you could say something about it, and maybe they can hear it on TV and understand it. And the bike lane, I don't know. So, but that I had to do. And I forgot with the third one, I had a senior moment. I couldn't get up and come back, though. Anyway, I thank you for listening to me, and I'm speaking on behalf of some of the seniors at the council that they like it, to hear about it, because they can't come, and I think it'd be nice to educate them. As you well know, you come to the meetings, how interested they really are in things. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further public comments? Good evening.
Hello, Valerie Swearingen, 2408 Fayette. I have two comments. One, I don't see Anthony here tonight, but I was planning on coming before the storm last night to tell him and his crew thank you for cleaning up a 30 to 40-foot branch that fell in front of, blocked our entire driveway last week or so. The school resource officer, I think his name was Officer Smith, stopped by first just to make sure we were okay because it was so close to cars. And then he waited there until Anthony came, and then Darren and Tyler from the public works staff, phenomenal. They got it cleaned up really quick, no time. That said, with today's, we had two more giant limbs block the street on Fayette. So I would like to ask, as you guys plan the budget for next year, that on the public works strategic plan, not only is there a bullet point for adding new trees, but also give them guidance to maintain the trees we have, because they're falling. They're old. I mean, they're gonna fall. It's gonna happen. Ours fell when it was a silent day, no storms, so that was weird. So I just want to ask that you guys support your staff and give them the guidance they need to take care of the old ones. And the other comment is a little bit more of a sensitive one, so give me a second. I want to make sure I get it right. I'm on the Parks Board, and I have sent 4 emails to mayor and council and acting city assistant city administrator, to understand why I'm not being reappointed to the Parks Board. For some background, for those council members that are new, a couple years ago, I think it might have been at Councilman Smith's request, you wanted an application process for incumbents to fill out a form so new members knew who these people were who were being reappointed. So I did that prior to my term limit ending May 31st. There was another another Parks Board member who had the same term expiration date. She did the same thing. She submitted her application and was on the next agenda. I submitted mine, and it's now been 5 agendas since then. So I'm just trying to understand. If you don't want to reappoint me, that's your right as mayor. But I feel like I have done a fantastic job. I've been publicly praised from the dais. I'm the treasurer. I was campaign manager of the park sales tax. That checked off one of your strategic items of reducing the need for gaming funds to be used at the Parks Board, so I don't understand. It's absolutely your right as mayor to choose whoever you want. I would love to be reappointed, obviously, but if you want to reappoint somebody else, will you please just do something? We have a major city council and Parks Board meeting in August to discuss River Forest Park, and without having a full legally active board, I still go to the meetings, but I don't want to be the one to make a motion. I don't want to be the one to second a motion. I don't want to be a tying vote breaker if I'm technically not supposed to be there because my term limit has expired. So I just politely ask, answer one of my emails or let me know. If you want me on there, great. If not, I respect that. I disagree, but I will respect that's your choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comments? Seeing none. Oh, one more. There we go. Please.
I emailed Katie and she's not here. I was just wondering, when we get to the bike plan, would you please explain or define what a shared bike path is? You know, I've kind of heard, what? You're making,
I was looking at Shu. Yeah. I think she'll be on that.
yeah, okay. I just
There's
want
an
to know
empty
what a
seat,
shared
yeah.
bike path is. And I've heard that going down Howell in front of the townhomes, they were going to take away some of the parking. So anyway, that's my.
Perfect. I believe,
thing.
yeah.
It's Roberta Larson, 3000 Gentry Park.
Thank you. Further comments? Seeing none. Seeing none. All right, now we move on to discussion items number 7, which is proposed water and sewer rates for calendar year 2024. And that will kick off with, I assume, Nick, or Mike, or
Just going to
You're
lead in, Mayor and members of the council. Tonight we have Tom Beckley here with Raftellus and, of course, Finance Manager Nick Hawkins to talk about the proposed water and sewer rates. The main purpose is budgetary. With the budget coming up, it's to give staff an idea of what to put in the budget rate-wise, as with last year and the year before. And, you know, I think it's the 3rd year in the 6-year plan. It was adopted 2 years ago. But again, we've got Nick and Tom here to kind of step through what they looked at this year as far as the recommendation and answer any questions.
good evening, Tom. Are we starting with Nick? Good evening, Nick.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. So I'll be very brief, and I'll have some comments throughout as we go through this presentation, but I'm going to kick it off to Tom right now to talk about the water and sewer rates. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the overall consumption of the city and how that is broken down between our commercial and residential and how a bill is put together. Then I'm going to kick it back to Tom to talk about our surcharge study that we've been working on for the past several months. And we'll finish it off with talking about some utility billing enhancements that have been made and some that we're planning for the future.
Thank you for having me, Council and Mayor. So we've been doing this study for North Kansas City for a few years now, and I was here last year and presented some findings. And this year we didn't do we wouldn't call it a comprehensive study, but we reviewed the financial plan and made sure that our recommendations last year would still, reach the goals that we want to accomplish with the utilities in terms of solvency, being self-sufficient, because that was one of the challenges we talked about last year, was making sure that each of the water and the sewer utility is self-sufficient. So we had recommended a 15% rate increase when we did the full study, and we re-examined that this year, and that will still continue us on the path we need to be, so we didn't need to make an adjustment to that. Of course, we're finishing master plan studies for the utilities, and that may change things, including the implementation of a stormwater utility, because, I've had some preliminary discussion with city staff that may result in some shifting of costs from existing utilities to the new stormwater utility, which could have some impact on the rates in a positive way, but then there's other things that may result from the master plans, of course, that will, of course, cost more money. So on the sewer rate side, we had a 7% rate increase proposed, and again, similar on the water, the 15% on the water, that will still hold and accomplish what we need to do. The forecasts, beyond this year are still on track, as we said, as it says at the bottom of the slide, but we're waiting on these revised master plans to know a little more and see where things go from there. So.
I want to take just a little bit of time at this point to just kind of go through how we bill in the city of North Kansas City. So, looking at this, I see some of the looks up there that show this is a breakdown of how different account classes consume water in the city. And so you can see very clearly here, commercial, which does include some apartments, is 96% of total consumption within the city.
Is there a question there? You look like you had. Councilmember Smith.
I'm just
Sorry, he
I'm
was
sorry.
ready to go.
I'm not. I don't have a question. I'm just chuckling at the color scheme
Okay.
of the map because virtually all of them are just a shade of light blue, so it's a little difficult to see. It. I mean, it looks like it's commercial and residential are the two that show up. Okay.
So I'll
That was
jump
more
to
money
this.
for more shades.
There you go.
I'll
Yeah.
jump to this next slide here, which gives more of the pie chart look at it. Yes, commercial
there we go.
are overwhelmingly
Still basically same.
the consumption in the city. There are actually more residential accounts than there are commercial accounts. It's about 55 to 60% of our total number of accounts are residential. And we do have a few government and church accounts that we bill a little bit differently. But yes, commercial is overwhelmingly the biggest by the consumption class. I'm going to jump and just look at residential. And so this is up-to-date consumption over the last 12 months. And you can see kind of some peaks and valleys here. When we get to the summer months, more water is used for sprinklers, pools, things like that. And so one of the things that we want to focus on over the next year as we look at some utility billing changes is to focus more on the communication so that when you get your bill, you can see, okay, here's why my bill went up or down from the previous month. And so this would be a preview on kind of an individual scale, what we're looking at for utility bills, that you would have this to reference whenever you get that bill for your own account. So that's one of the changes that we're looking at for the next year. But I wanted to show this because we do get a lot of questions from residents each month where, hey, my bill went up by $10 or $15. Well, if you have something like this on your bill, you can see it gives you a better clue as to why that may have occurred. I also wanted to just go through kind of an example residential bill. So you'll see on the next slide that Tom will talk about a comparison between other communities and how they're billed. But in North Kansas City, if you have a 4,000 gallon use rate, we have a base charge on the water side right now that is $21.34. There's a consumption charge that starts at 3,500 gallons. And we have a rate from 3,500 to 10,000 gallons. It's, I believe, $1.67. So if you use 4,000 gallons, then you would be charged consumption for those 500 gallons. That's 84 cents. There's a 1% sales tax that is charged there too. On the sewer side, the consumption is billed at a rate per 1,000 gallons plus a base charge rate, and that's to, we send our wastewater into North Kansas or into the city of Kansas City, and so we have to somewhat mirror that in order to make sure that we're up to date on paying the city of Kansas City for that. So that's why the sewer rate is different. It's to match Kansas City. Average bill, actually the average bill in North Kansas City, about 3/4 of our residents use less than 3,500 gallons, so they wouldn't even see that consumption charge on the water side on there. But if we're using the 4,000 gallons, which is our comparison number, right now that bill would be $79.46. Proposed for next year, that bill would be $86.81. So 9.2% cumulative increase, $7.35 dollar increase.
I'm going to go ahead and ask a question here, maybe a couple. And this one, probably for Tom, you've done the study here. Essentially we have a water table here that has something like 7 tiers. Do most cities have 7 tiers?
No, they typically have less tiers, but our residential customers don't typically get into those upper tiers. If there's a tiered structure, personally, my preference, doing this 22 years now, is I like 3 tiers because it's easier to explain.
So let me follow. Maybe you can tag along with that. Easier to explain 3 tiers, but could we potentially minimize the increase on residents because they would be the smaller tiers if we start to roll up some of those larger tiers?
We could certainly go to a uniform rate, for commercial and residential, and roll up those tiers, as you say. That's one option. And Nick and I were actually talking before the meeting because we kept this update simple, and he indicated there has been an indication we'd like to take a closer look at the rates. And so, I think what I'm hearing is we want to take a closer look, not really at the.
I don't know if it's we. I'd have to see what they think on that. But as I look at this and look at other cities and look for opportunities to change structure a little bit, and like I said, try to minimize impact on residents particularly. I look at that as one potential way.
Yeah, and Nick showed you some important things, like for instance, that 95% of our usage is in the commercial side.
Yeah.
So, our residents are really a very small number, and then he mentioned 70% use 3,500 gallons or less. So that indicates maybe we'd want to look at getting rid of the minimum, which is, in my 22 years, I've never implemented a minimum. I have unimplemented minimums in some communities. There's a move away from using minimums because it does help. I see a few of them here. It's a term I often use, the little old lady on a fixed income who only uses 1,500 gallons a month.
Yeah. Being billed for 35 no matter what.
It can, right, exactly. Yeah. And so there are definitely some opportunities. So the scope this time was relatively simple. When we did the large study, we were trying to fix some of the challenges with the water utility, and we didn't, because the challenges when we have the large increases we're implementing on the water side is if we start changing the rate structure, we would have very large impacts on some customers. So if we're doing a 15% increase overall, if we were changing the rate structure, then you'd have people, then it would range for customers from 0 to 30. Whereas once we fix, that fundamental issue with the water utility, we get to more manageable increases, then we can start adjusting the rate structure and not have huge impacts on individual customers. So, in the future, if we have a 5% increase on water, but we change the rate structure, it may range from 0 to 10% on individual customers.
Yeah.
Whereas if you changed it when you're doing a 15% increase, it's going to range from like 0 to 30% on individual customers.
Yeah, generally, I would support exploring, again, simplifying that structure, one, and then you threw out another idea, which I didn't know I like now, is lowering that minimum as well, because you do make a good point about some of our usage.
And maybe expanding a customer assistance program, and can we get that, can we add that as a budget line item? Because, you know, when you look at who pays the water bills, yet who would be eligible for the assistance program, I think there's opportunity here to help your vulnerable customers.
Perfect, thank you. Further comments at the moment? All right, keep heading on here.
So this is the bill comparison. So, you know, we've been using 4,000 gallons a month, although as Nick said, you know, you have a lot of customers who are below that, but this is a pretty typical bill we use a comparison. And so you can see right now, we're the lowest among the comparison communities we've been using for the past few years. With the increase, we'll move kind of in the middle, but, you know, still, you know, right there among our peers, except for Kansas City, Missouri, which is much higher than North Kansas City. Next, I'm going to talk briefly about pollutant surcharges. As you may recall, or maybe you don't, we were given a contract to assist with examining the pollutant surcharges because when we did this study last year, we recognized there were some issues in how we were monitoring our surcharge customers. And there's one surcharge customer in particular that comprises a vast majority of the surcharge revenue. You know, it's Ingredion. And so we knew there was an issue. And so we started examining that. And we looked at a lot of different, you know, we were looking at all the data that was available. Ingredion provided us data that they had available on their end, and we were examining that. Then, of course, as you may also be aware, about 6 months ago, our charges from Kansas City spiked because Ingredion started sending us even more pollutants. Now, they were paying for them, but there was still, you know, concern because it was a big increase. So we've made a lot of progress on this. And so there's a couple key things. There's a rate differential. We've always known that the rate we charge our surcharge customers is actually less than what Kansas City charges us for the exact same thing. So, I mean, we've got numbers here. So for every pound of BOD, which is biochemical oxygen demand, it's a way to measure basically the dirty bacteria in the water. I'm not an expert, but, you know, for those of you who may not.
There's some fun reads out there, though.
That's the dirtiness, and then TSS is total suspended solids, which is really just solid stuff that needs to be settled out and then disposed of, and that's pretty much what it sounds like. It's solids that are in the water that need to be taken out. Kansas City right now charges us 55 cents per pound for BOD, 24 cents per pound for TSS, but we only charge our surcharge customers, which is over 90% Ingredion, 33 cents for BOD and 17 cents for suspended solids. Now, when this was implemented, the thinking is that other customers were diluting Ingredion, so it was okay. The problem is we're not seeing that dilution. And so we need to, and so what we would recommend we do is potentially change the city ordinance to just be, we're going to charge anybody what we pay Kansas City. And that way it doesn't require action on your part once you approve that.
Let me ask you, you said anybody, but we only know, how do we know a customer is putting this stuff into our system?
Well, they're monitored customers. We have an industrial surcharge program. We have an industrial pretreatment
But is that
program.
an honesty system of sorts initially
No.
to say you're putting that in? Like, how do we know?
Well, if
where
we
these things are coming
we
from?
know what.
I mean, we know the big one. Okay, let's say there's other things.
There
also
are
contributing
other
to this.
ones, and there are other ones.
Yeah.
And so they're
Sorry,
not.
I know we get the big one.
No,
that one's obvious.
And it's really, I'm not an expert on exactly how that works, but we ask companies what they do, and then if we think they might, but we think they're probably not, but they might, then you might go test them once a year.
Okay.
And then confirm, yeah, they're not putting
Got it.
anything bad in there. If we know they're doing it, then we test them regularly. And that's how we measure their strength that we actually surcharge them for. And then some of them are somewhere in between, which is we know they do bad things, but when we potentially bad things, and not bad, but you know, we know they're potentially putting pollutants in there, but we've tested them and they didn't do it, so then we go back and check 6 months later to make sure they're not doing it, as opposed to the spot check just to be, we don't think they're doing it, but let's check them. And you know, there's different levels basically. You know, like for instance, one large utility I work for basically has 5 levels of customers, from being, we might occasionally spot check you, to you're continuously monitored, like Ingredion is. And so it's kind of a continuum for your commercial customers. But that's, you know, what we're recommending, assuming, you know, and we need to work with legal staff to make sure that we can do this, is basically what we would recommend is we implement that we're going to charge what Kansas City charges. And then when Kansas City raises their rate, our rate will automatically go up, because Kansas City's rates go up May 1st every year.
Yeah.
Because they have a weird fiscal year. And so it's different than our budget cycle and everything else anyway. So that's what we would recommend. If not, we need to make sure that we better mirror what Kansas City is doing regardless, but that's kind of the straightforward approach. And then there's a data discrepancy, and we're still working with staff on developing a better way because we have an approach that we bill them on, and there's some things that we've identified that should be changed, and we're still trying to identify exactly what data we're going to use to bill them on an ongoing basis, and that's what we're working through with staff still, and we expect that to have that resolved in the next few months. We actually did a field trip out to Ingredion in the past couple weeks, so.
I'm sure they were thrilled.
No, they were quite helpful.
Were they?
They were, but it really was, we would come here and sit around a table and talk about it a lot, and finally we're like, why don't we just go to Ingredion and really make sure we understand what they're doing, and so that's what we did.
I just know this is their favorite subject, water rates.
It is, and they actually have a subcontractor who does a lot of the work for them, so they were very helpful, and it really helped enlighten us on exactly what was going on out there.
Perfect. Thank you. We got recent future needs. Okay.
I'll jump in here, and this is, I think, our last slide before talking about some next steps. But we met in February of last year to talk about the utility billing process overall and to look at some potential changes there. First, wanted to talk about some of the things that we did implement from that. So that is the water shutoff process, which we talked a lot about. We increased it basically from, if you had an overdue bill, you were on the shutoff list, and we'd go a couple days after the regular billing and do that shutoff process. We changed that at your recommendation to $100. That decreased our initial list of shutoffs from, I'd say, 50 to 60 down to around 30. And then one of the changes that we implemented after we went through this for a month or two was we worked with the water crews to start hanging door tags a week in advance. So we would run our shutoff list a week in advance and then go out and notify customers a week before so that they would have time to go in and make payments. And we've also added an extended shutoff process as well. So if they came to us before the shutoff date and said we're not able to pay at this moment, we'd give them an extra 2 weeks to try and settle that. And that has decreased our shutoffs from a range of 30 to 35 down to 5 to 7 per month. And those 5 to 7, it can change from month to month, but a lot of times there's still kind of those frequent flyers that we talked about the last time. So I think that has been a positive change. The door tag program has really made a big impact there and goes towards one of our goals, which is trying to increase the communication we have on billing so that you understand what you're being billed and what your options are. We've also added payment options without convenience fees, primarily on phones, so you can call an IVR number and pay your bill without a convenience fee. That minimizes some liability on our end from taking credit card information over the phone. Text to pay is very similar to that, and we've had a number of customers utilize that. Still, our best option is ACH payment, which we've always had, and we'll look to just get some more communication out on our website. And then when we look towards future enhancements, one of the things that we are actively working on trying to get into is full page billing. And right now we have the postcards, which you all know, which oftentimes can get lost in the mail. It's hard to present information on there without overcrowding it. And so we plan to implement a full page bill, which will give more information. That chart that you saw earlier on the usage each month, customers would have that. We would also look at adding some other information on there that would just give you a better picture of what's in your bill and how it's changed from prior months. So when we do that, we'll switch. There will be some cost increases, but it should not affect our rate structure or rate increases. And we can do that. We've gone out to visit a couple different cities to see how that process works when we switch to that. We're also looking at enhancing our e-billing to provide just better kind of up-to-date communication with our customers, and we'll kind of relaunch some communication campaigns to get more folks on that e-billing as we, deal with just regular challenges with post office and things like that. So we're excited. We've got a good team in place right now with the city that want to be as supportive and helpful as possible, and just put more of that information in the residents' hands so we can be of better assistance to them.
Councilmember Toll.
I know this would be in the future, but I think the more automated and the more information that people can get online about their own account would be really beneficial. So seeing how the whole city goes up and down in different times, I know you can do this with other energy bills that you have, going into your own personal usage to see how it's used and whether or not you would benefit from signing up for the program where we do your wastewater based on the winter months. Being able to access all of that online for your personalized to your account would be really helpful, and pay online with no convenience fee like the phone and text to pay.
We do plan to recommend, we're trying to determine if we need to come to council in order to take off that convenience fee, but that will be a recommendation that we will put forward on the online bill payment. And speaking of the winter sewer averaging and being able to monitor your account, we've seen some options that other cities have used that we really like. And, it's really a matter of just making sure that we are comfortable internally first so that we can roll it out and be better able to answer questions. Because if you're able to go in and see, some cities you can go in and see, you're up to date by the hour usage if you want, and get notifications if there's continuous usage, things like that. Our system right now, we just need to make sure that it works with our system and that we're ready for questions that will come up when that happens, because every once in a while, we have a collector system. Each meter has a kind of a radio signal on it. Sometimes those radio signals go down, so it can make it look like you're not consuming any water, and that can lead to questions. But there are just some internal things that we want to work out. But we've seen some other cities use that, and it's been very helpful to them.
I'll be excited to see that. I'm glad you're working on it.
Okay, there we go. Ennis says thank you. Councilmember Smith.
Thanks for the presentation. The tiered system going from a 7 to a 3, or at least decluttering that, seems like a great way forward. I agree, maybe not in a year when we're doing a 15%. And we have to be mindful that while our our voting base and the people we serve are the residents, we also have businesses that operate here, and having a whiplash effect on them with a effective 30% rise could also impact our residents who work at those businesses. So we have to be mindful of that. So maybe next year we look at something like that, in my opinion. Eliminating the minimums almost feels like a no-brainer, though. Like, that's, especially since the residents make up such a small portion, and people are, I forget what percentage you threw out, said use under the minimum. Like, that would be a benefit right away. So I would recommend going that way. And as far as no-brainers go, mirroring Casey Mo's charges to us on the pollutant seems like an absolute. It's defensible. It's like they raise the rates. That's what we pay. Why wouldn't we pass it exactly through? I will, as Liz asked, you were talking about the water rate situation for the seniors. I've got a write-up that I'll read unless other people have questions or comments right now.
Councilmember Toll.
It'll be brief. I just wanted to piggyback off of what he said, agree with everything you said. And what could we do now? Could we eliminate the minimum now before the next 15% hike, easing that blow? Can we bring an ordinance within the next couple months?
I guess, okay. So I kind of talked about this earlier. In general, they're probably looking for something for budget purposes. We don't necessarily need to approve this or have something in place.
No, but how
tonight
quickly
or
could
next
it
meeting.
happen? Or is this something that has to happen months and months in the future?
I would ask for one thing, though. This is where the fund balances would come in handy. Do we have the fund balances for presentation this evening?
I don't have them off the top of my head.
I can say right now our projected, with the increase in place at the end of next year, would be on the water side, if we don't include the capital, our fund balance would be around 14%.
Would we have like a final dollar value on that? What is?
Dollar value
Yeah, like,
would
what
be
would that
about 650,000.
Okay.
On the wastewater side, without capital or with capital, that fund balance would be around 12%, or about 1.5 million.
Okay. No, I mean, I definitely started with it, so I'd support rolling it up somehow, still probably hitting a 15% total, which is, I think, what you need for the budget. Overall is what that total increase would look like.
Yeah, and again, some of the things that staff is working on, it'll be part of your guys' budget discussions, is what should those reserve policies be? Kind of the recommendation would be at least 25%. So at the end, with this rate, we'd still be almost half of where those reserve funds would, just from budgeting best practices, be.
I mean, in general, I know we kind of beat people up the last few years at rates. That's why I was kind of looking at some alternatives as I was starting to study other cities' programs and how they're doing it. And that's where the tier thing came up, but I do love the minimum.
And my caution would be, we can't just, if we lowered the minimum, like even if we try to phase it in over 2 years, say go to 2,000 one year and then zero the following year, it's going to have an impact on revenue. So we can't, we would need a bigger than 15% kind of headline increase to account for the build unit, the revenue that we would lose by doing that.
I guess I need a better understanding, like what a 1% increase would do for our customers over 210,000. And, I'd have to get into kind of all the rates to know exactly what that
I don't
looks
want to make it seem like eliminating the minimum would have a huge impact,
Yeah.
but our balance is fairly precarious, which is the only reason I take caution. And I think we need to do a comprehensive look at the rate structure all
There we
at
go.
once, instead of trying to piecemeal it. That would be my recommendation.
Agree. So I hope we get some direction tonight to kind of take some things back and look at what all this
Right.
could look like. Councilmember Saper.
I'd like
I don't
to
miss anyone over here.
remind residents that in the past, we were transferring gaming fund revenue to keep the rates low. In effect, as you can see from these presentations, we were subsidizing the huge business interests that are using virtually all of our water. And it really wasn't benefiting the citizens who live in North Kansas City. So that's one of the reasons for these rate increases. But we do have to look at maybe mitigating some of the shock and awe of these rate increases by playing around with minimums and things like that. Thank you.
One other thing I'd like to remind everybody that I mentioned last year is part of the water increases, we are undoing decreases that were done contrary to recommendations that were made to,
Yeah, we were trying to balance out the total bills, what we were doing.
Well, I know, but
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
we're basically undoing rate decreases.
We did
too.
it too much too fast
Yeah.
on that win. Yeah. I saw. Did you have? Okay, Councilmember Clark.
I mean, not to just muddy the water, but just in speaking of the gaming fund, we have to keep in mind, and just another, if you know or if you don't know, or just a reminder that the gaming fund is funded specifically in part by HERA's, I think, ticketing sales and things, and sales tax, but the other part is the TIF from Northgate, and that starts to phase out starting 2027. So I think this is our effort to go to sort of start to try to fill that space as it starts to wean away in 2027, and then it goes away for good in 32. So that's just something to always keep in mind. Thanks.
Yeah, and just in general, that's for all capital improvements. It's the way we've treated it, and want to continue to treat it that way. All recurring expenses should have some sort of matching revenue. Councilmember Fitzgerald.
I just wanted to mention briefly, I agree with everything Mr. Saper said. It's important context to remember that, I'm sure if the tiers, I don't have the math exactly, but somewhere in the nature of 95% based on total usage of what the city is subsidizing to the cost of these services is going to the commercial side as opposed to residents. And also the sewer costs are essentially a direct pass-through from Kansas City, Missouri. We don't really have any control over that. That's a cost that we don't have anywhere else to send the sewage. So we're billed what they bill us.
Unless we're getting our own sewage. Councilmember Toll. No?
I would still like to look at getting rid of that minimum for residents before you do a study of an overall structured plan. And I know that it would cost us money, but if we did it at the same time as making our rates match what KCMO is charging us, then we will also be bringing in more money from companies that we're imposing that surcharge on. So I don't think we'll take a net loss on that, and I don't like residents paying for water they're not using.
Right. I completely agree with you. My one word of caution on that is keep in mind the matching of the Kansas City rates is sewer and the minimum is water, so they don't really offset each other because we're,
Oh, I'm thinking of it as one fund. I
Which
see what
they're
you're
not,
saying.
yes.
I see what you're saying.
because that's part of our goal too, is to make sure each fund is really, so that, each fund is self-sufficient, basically. And that's why we're seeing 15% increase on water, but not, it's lower on sewer. So that's my one word of caution on that, is we can't horse trade like that necessarily.
Okay, so how long would it take to come up with a number that we're comfortable with as far as if we were to stair step it down? If we were to change the minimum to 2,000?
Do the minimum and tiers.
I think Nick can if Nick can get me the data on the number of customers using less than the minimum, that's a pretty straightforward.
We can at least bring it down a little bit and
Yeah.
stair step it instead of waiting another year or two.
Yeah, like I said, my main concern is, as Nick mentioned, is the fund balance is
Yeah.
not that healthy on the water side right now. And so I don't think it's a huge impact, but certainly we don't have a lot of breathing room on the water side right now either.
I know, but if it has to be supplemented, I would prefer that we have to take the brunt of that as opposed to residents paying for water that they're not using.
And there may be other options we can look at, even that I was talking with city staff about earlier this evening. So we'll talk, we'll circle the wagons on that.
Okay, sounds good.
So for budget purpose, I think we're going to try to increase the bucket for what you need for the budget side. How we do that be subject to interpretation here. There we go. Councilmember Saper.
I know the city staff has been monitoring various federal funding possibilities in terms of actually establishing our own wastewater treatment facilities here in North Kansas City. There are many issues involved in that, but to the extent that some of these federal monies do become available, that's something we need to consider for the future. I know the staff is monitoring that.
Of course, part of what has driven up Kansas City's rates in recent years is the fact that some of their customers did exactly that too. Liberty built their own sewage treatment plant. Johnson County, Kansas was actually one of their largest customers, and they rerouted so that they could send it to their own treatment plant. And then, of course, that just created upward pressure on everybody who was remaining, including North Kansas City.
Sounds like other entities. Councilmember Smith.
Okay, so for the seniors listening on Channel 2, this one's for you. I wrote this up last year, shared it on social media, but I'm going to read it out, so bear with me. And I'll try to update it on the fly for this year. So many of you likely noticed an increase in your water sewer bill. This is the result of a 6-year scheduled plan rate increase. We are currently in year 3, which calls for a 15% increase in water and a 7% increase in sewer. Let me give you some information on how we got here. Council decided in August of 21 to raise water and sewer rates. A comprehensive study was done by an independent third party, Raftellus. The sewer fund was completely out of money, and the water fund was quickly running out of money. These are operating funds which should be self-sufficient, meaning bringing in sufficient revenue to cover their costs. For a long time, the city has subsidized these funds with transfers from the gaming fund, which are revenues from our agreement with Harrah's and, as Amy pointed out, the Northgate TIF. Subsidizing like this is bad business because we should not rely on gaming revenue to fund ongoing operations. The gaming fund should be used for one-time projects, infrastructure repair, non-recurring purchases, etc., in case it eventually goes away, as in if Harrah's decides to leave the area or faces increasing competition. For the rate increase, prior to the rate increase, North Kansas City had by far the lowest water and sewer rates in the metro area, and after the increases, we will likely remain toward the middle or bottom third of these expenses. Additionally, since businesses make up roughly, I had 80%, now it's 96, goodness, of total water use, and one business uses over 50% of all water in the city, we were effectively subsidizing businesses' operations through water and sewer transfers from the gaming fund. Under the new rate structure, the water and sewer funds will become self-sufficient. It was not a decision we took lightly. We consulted with experts along the way, and this was their recommended path forward.
Was that approved by legal counsel? I saw a look. No, I'm kidding. Never mind, he's out of it. Okay, further comments? Thank you for the reading. Still more comments? Oh, okay, that was it, okay. No, okay. Do we have what we need over here? Well, first of all, thank you for the presentation, Nick and Tom. Do we have what we need over here? Good, and I guess we'll see you again sometime in the near future, it sounds like. Yes, you are welcome back. Thank you. Number 8, bike master plan discussion. Chu.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. This item in front of you has been discussed in our last meeting back in June. At our last meeting, I've provided a list of the projects that's being impacted by MoDOT construction. Our Missouri Department of Transportation has quite a few projects that going through our city that's under or upcoming. So we are postponing some of those projects as recommended by them. Therefore, we are reopening this discussion for reprioritizing our list for our recommended bike facilities. As mentioned by some of the citizens earlier, this is the bike master plan that's being adopted by the city years ago. There are quite a few different types of bike facilities as shown on this map. One of them is the shared use path that's in the light blue. The shared use path, I would like to describe a little bit of what the kind of facility really it is. Generally, it is about a 10-foot to about a 15-foot wide concrete path. Imagine a sidewalk, 5 foot, so doubling that amount. That's usually what it looks like for a shared use path. The intention for the width is to accommodate all type of users that are non-motorized. For example, the pedestrians, the bicyclists, and for bicyclists, it will not be for racing and very aggressive bicyclists. We're generally for toddlers and very entry-level bicyclists. And you can also require for walk your wheel at some sections if you need to, and strollers, scooters, things like that. So that's why it is a shared use path. The intention is to separate these non-motorized modes of transportation from the motor vehicles and to provide enough width over there for accommodating this multimodal needs itself. So if you guys are interested, I can share a little bit more details of what shared use path would be like. So currently in North Kansas City, we don't have a great example of a shared use path. I have to say that is true. We don't really have constructed shared use path very much. As you can see on this map, we have planned quite a few shared use paths that's currently has not been constructed yet. Part of them is the 32nd Avenue. That's the east-to-west shared use path along our north boundary, and one of them also is a very important connector that's connecting our Diamond Parkway to 14th Avenue on the east side of the Highway 29. And this is a shared use path that's being postponed due to MoDOT's plan. We also do have some shared use path we have planned along Armour Road under Highway 35 and 29 all the way to Birmingham, and another section of shared use path being planned between Clark Ferguson to Armour Road along Howell Street in Iron. So with that said, I have showed this list from our last meeting, but I would like to hear from you after I give you my opinion on this particular list. So this is a list of the projects that's being recommended by the Bike Master Plan with some slight modification for some of those projects. On this list, the highlighted ones are the ones I would recommend you to consider for this upcoming fiscal year. One of them is the Howell Street shared use path that goes from 32nd Avenue to Armour Road. I have broken it down into two sections. The reason for that is the north component of it is originally recommended as a protected bike line from 32nd Avenue to Clark Ferguson, as you can see on Howell. It is shown as a green line over here. That's what a protected bike line is being determined here. And this protected bike lane will be next to the Mackin Park, if you were trying to figure out, picture where the location of it is. And the south component of it is going from Clark Ferguson to Armour Road. It does jog around a little bit over by 23rd Avenue, but that is identified as a shared use path per the Bike Master Plan. I would recommend you to consider both north and south sections of this particular facility to be a shared use path to increase the consistency and the continuity use of a shared use path, especially for the potential riders and property users along Mackin Park. So at this point, we don't know exactly which side the shared use path will be located. I would say largely the chance would be on the east side with more of the right-of-way and with more of the current amenities that we have. But we'll have to go through particular designing and engineering service to understand which side it will be. Yes,
First question on that, does that really need to jog back and forth like that?
that
It-
is
it kinda
another
seems-
question we will determine.
Because, yeah, if we're going to make things easy, if our intention is to make things easy for people to use,
Right.
I think, yeah, you need to keep an alignment there.
That is currently
that
like a little
seems-
community area over there with a memorial
Yeah.
component there.
I just, just I look at that, and I remember discussing this in the past, but
Mm-hmm.
as we look at it, I do think you actually got to make it easier for people to use if
We
they're gonna use
probably will go through the engineering designing process with some public engagement component in it, so this way everybody can announce their opinions when we get to the detailed design. But that's what I would recommend you to consider for this particular list. And along with those two projects, and just given the, the details and facts and the scale of it, I would recommend you to consider those two as separate projects. You could consider it as phase 1, 2. We can't construct them all together and bid them all together through engineering services, but literally they're two different projects per the bike master plan.
Can you go back a slide real quick?
This map?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I guess you only have a couple of them here. One I think we should eventually look at is we talk a lot about connecting with the region here. One connection that people brought up is east. So we have Diamond Parkway, but then you have this Birmingham Road connection to Choteau Parkway. So that people able to hit other regional connections. Obviously, we already have Burlington in the works, so we should be in a pretty good place there. But as you look to the eastern connection, that might be a project worth looking at some point, just to make sure we're starting to actually close connections and build networks that people can use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one I didn't particularly recommend for this fiscal year. A couple of reasons. One
Yeah.
of them is we are going to have a kickoff meeting for our planning sustainable places. I'm not sure if you guys remember that we applied last year for a riverfront levee trail study. The termination of that particular trail is up in the air right now. So I know you can see the riverfront trail over here. It's highlighted in blue for a large section of it, and goes to like a purple, which is a conventional bike lane when you get to the riverboat drive. However, we don't know exactly where the route is going to be when it gets to the Harris over there. So we'll be discussing this particular trail and how it can tie into either Armour Road or Choteau Traffic Way in this particular study. So I think after this study, and this study will have to engage largely with our levee district. So there will be a key stakeholder here to tell us what they approve, not approve, and what they endorse. Over here, I think that project will give us a little bit clear guidance on what we're going to do for this section,
Yeah.
along the Birmingham. Are we going to reuse Birmingham? Because right now, there's a lot of railroad component over to it too, and a discussion of right-of-way there too. So we will try to find out a clear path, probably. I think this is a good study that will provide us
Okay.
some guidance.
Yeah, just as you
Over
do look
there.
at connections, because Diamond Parkway kind of ends there, and if you're wanting to go further east, you're kind of out of luck.
Mhm.
So if you're starting in the central area, 16th, 18th Avenue, and say Howell, I mean, generally you're not going to want to go all the way down to the riverfront along Burlington, assuming we get all that done, and then go along the riverfront either.
Right.
You're going to want to go down Diamond Parkway and cut east across Birmingham. But I saw the nods over there in Birmingham too. There's a lot of stuff happening over there.
Yeah,
A lot
Birmingham
of parts sitting
is-
around.
Yeah, Birmingham is a heavily wooded area with a
Yeah.
lot of railroads around there too.
Yeah.
So ideally, on the map, it's a pretty clear path. But
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
get ready to get in there, it's not a very clear path there. So we have to explore a little bit more.
Yep.
And for this fiscal year, I just don't recommend for this upcoming one, but definitely that's something we should explore in the future.
All right, you want to go back? There we go. All right, you ready for us?
I would like to hear your opinions.
All right, what do we got? What do we got? Here we go. Nobody? Nobody. There we go. Councilmember Toll.
I think like last meeting, I agree with how you've prioritized this. I think that's a great shared use path that could be used a lot by families. I look forward to the study to see about straightening that out, like they had said. But I would suggest, I know it's split into north and south, looking at it as one continuous project.
Shared lane markings. How much do you plan on spending on those? I mean, those aren't exactly. don't know.
So the Sherlin markings over here, as you see on this map, they're highlighted in that very linear thing or hair thing orange line.
Yeah.
We don't have all of them painted with it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a critic of
The reason
those.
I
Yeah.
highlighted it is this is the lowest hanging fruit and easiest approach, but it's not an easy approach really, because you have to coordinate a lot with the business district, especially for the ones along Bedford Avenue over there. So
And they really don't mean a lot. It's not offering any
they
sort of
don't
actual
need a
protection.
lot. Yeah, they don't need a lot. Like it's
Well, it
not. It's
actually
a low
offers zero
cost.
protection. Yeah.
It does require a lot of engagement from staff side for communication. It does not involve a lot of actual actions for construction.
Yeah.
I'll put it this way. So that's something you could consider. Maybe we should start discussing and engage with business owners.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just not the biggest fan of Sharrows in general, but that's just me. Councilmember Smith.
So speaking of Sharrows, during a very heated meeting a few years back over the bike master plan, we were promised by a local business that if we were to move toward Sharrows, they would paint them for free. And I will pull up the meeting because that was said in a very heated exchange. And I'm not sure they meant it, but it's on the public record. So I would actually be interested in pursuing that backwards. The other thing is if we're going to talk about regional connections, which I like, Burlington corridor is going to be years in the making. But if we're going to work on Howell Street, getting it up to the north from 32nd Avenue down, the shared path across 32nd Avenue would connect to North Oak and to, onward toward Parkville. I think adding that in as a full route, so we don't have just another orphan segment of bike lane would be useful. So looking at 32nd as well.
Is 32nd in scope with the project we're doing with the other cities?
I was about to say, this is another section that we are currently looking at through a different project. We have another Planning Sustainable Place grant that
that
we
that
awarded with a
northeast?
multi-county, the super long name, Multi-County Barrier Removal Project. That one is part of that component, how we are going to address that.
And this is where I worry about all the bike master planning is we keep building segments that don't connect. Like we got all the puzzle pieces sitting on the table, we're not putting them together. I don't know where we're at in that process, but I would like to see us eventually connect outside of the city. So that would be my main spot, so that since we've got so much headed that direction, but if it's part of another thing.
So really, for this section, I don't think it will create much of a conflict in that process, meaning our current plan, I think, giving the recommendation of a shared use path along 32nd Avenue, I think it's a pretty straightforward project. It would not complicate the process. So even if we were to go through that planning stage with a further regional connection, I think this section itself will still be a good attribute, meaning I don't think we're going to tear it up again and rebuild anything. So it can still be a good asset to add on to it if you consider to spend the money on this project.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I believe Councilmember Saper.
I know I'm going to upset a lot of bicycle enthusiasts, and especially the organized groups, but I would like to see some kind of data for the actual usage of the bike lanes that we have now, and actually by season if possible. Because I, for one, don't see a lot of usage of the bike lanes that we have existing. Part of it is probably because they don't connect. I understand that. But I'm not sure just how much benefit it really provides to most of the residents of North Kansas City or the businesses or anyone else. It looks good on the map, and I know it's the theme of the decade, but I would like to see some data to support the use and need.
And I'll ask staff and then I'll ask you. I know lots of people have been taking data along Armour Road. Were any of those, was it like Mark or Bike Walk KC doing any of the data taking recently? Do you know? Or does anybody know?
So we have had traffic counts for multimodal traffic counts last year. The number, I don't have it on top of my head, but I can certainly send it to Mr. Sapers. We do have a couple intersections that we did the traffic counts, and we're planning on doing a few more. Like usually, we will keep the same set of the intersections that we do every year so we can track the changes. And the multimodal transportation counts does give you the data of how many bike users, how many truck would be going through that. So I can share that with you. And another thing that I would mention is the reason I think I was recommending a Hubble shared use path, like I said before, is we don't have a real shared use path in our city. So building a shared use path is probably a good experience for us to explore. This is not a traditional bike lane just for bicyclists. This is meant to be created for everybody who can, who's a non-motorized user.
Perfect. Councilmember Clark.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to keep pushing the shared use. I know it's really easy to sort of attack the bike lanes, and I will say to your point, Councilmember Saper, it really is the connectability that makes it so hard to I take that way when I'm coming this way, but I generally take Diamond Parkway because I head, south of the city sometimes. There are a lot of biking groups that don't just exist, it's a piece of community. It's like, if you can imagine, almost like a traveling church without sort of like a heavy religious component, but it's a means of community, and it kind of gathers people together, and people want to feel safe because there's the very confident group of cyclists, and then there's people coming in from all other areas and parking and saying, okay, I'm going to leave from here, and then I'm going to patron your business after. And we get groups of 10 to 60 people at a time that are heading over to Chicken Pickle after, or all different areas afterward that you may not necessarily see, but what they're leaning toward to maybe ride on their own, to start commuting to work, to start really opening up those possibilities, is they want to feel safe. They want to feel like, okay, is this possible if I don't have 60 of my closest friends with me to kind of go together? I want to feel like I can do that. But I also have feedback from Ward 4 residents that have written me specifically to say, I commute to work. They have every day on their bikes. They don't mind showering at work. They actually don't even mind being a little funky because, we all have different jobs. But they commute back and forth and rely on the alternative transportation routes. And when we even weigh out KCATA numbers and we think about how many people are riding the buses and the cost of the buses, I mean, if we weigh that out for people that are riding bikes that they're supplying themselves, that is no real ongoing cost to the city. I mean, then we're actually maybe comparing sort of alternative transportation opportunities and costs and things like that. But I think let's just not, just try to stick with us on this as a city vision that we still need alternative forms of transportation. We need people out and groups like All Bodies on Bikes and places like that. Like, they're trying to get everybody just out of the house and increasing community engagement outside of cars.
Thank you, Councilmember Fitzgerald.
Just building on those safety comments.
Oh, no, go, please.
Sorry, I
please.
thought you had something there. I'm still seeing cars driving in the Armour Road bike lanes further east towards I-35. This wasn't necessarily on the projects here, but I maybe wanted to gauge if there'd be any interest in expanding those protective barriers further down Armour.
Oh, yeah, someone just asked me about that. Is that you? No, there's someone else then.
Is that a question for me?
Please, if you got the answer.
I don't have the answer today.
Oh, we
We
can find
will
it, though.
certainly be happy to look into it. The reason I'm saying that is, first, there's no excuse, but I did not handle the Armour Road Complete Street Bike Lane project. So there is a lot of catch up I have to go through to understand why does it cut off over there? Maybe that was the initial plan, that how we will break it down into sections, but you all probably have the knowledge of that.
Yeah.
And in the second part, and I have asked this question too. I'm wondering if that's the right-of-way issue. And the second component for that, I would just say, if you see on this map, east of Ozark over there, that is where we have done a east-west connections study that recommended a shared use path on both sides of the north and south for Armour Road over there. So if we were to extend it, we'll have to deal with this section as well. Right now, we are not moving forward with that. As part of the reason I mentioned last time was because MoDOT has a planned particular PEL study, the planning environmental linkage study that addressing this particular intersection. We're kind of waiting to see how they roll it out. And we also need MoDOT's approval and support of our project. So this is why I think Carmel Road stopped right there over there. I totally get it. It's frustrating when you have bike lanes stop where it's not supposed to, that people feel like it should continue. That's just the path of life that we'll continue building and moving forward.
Council.
But we're definitely looking to it.
Okay.
Thank you
that
for your
context
input.
helps, so I appreciate it.
Councilmember Smith.
So to respond partially to Councilmember Saper, I understand the desire for data. I love data. The trouble with this is, as Amy pointed out, and as I said earlier, it's basically like you built some beautiful hiking trails on mountain peaks with nothing connecting them, and you're like, why doesn't anybody use these trails? So right now, there's nothing, like you can ride down Armour Road, but it doesn't connect you anywhere. So looking for how many people are doing that would be somewhat fruitless until it connects you somewhere. And that's the goal of the next piece. It's been the kind of the goal all along, is to build out a network. And if we stop here, look at data and say, well, there's not a lot of people riding it. Well, to me, that's why we don't connect anywhere yet. And so unless we finish the grid here where people can connect, data won't mean much.
All right, now I'm going to flip to, I saw some hands waving here earlier.
Hello, I do have one piece of data point, and I received it too late to include it in this particular agenda packet, but we have begun to receive the Bike Walk KC bike rental, and I can kind of read off at least the April, May, and June. In April, they had 169, May 157, and June 286 rentals here in North Kansas
Does
City.
those are originating here or ending here? Or?
There is a data point that leads them to here, yes. I don't have the finite granular data
Got it.
here,
Okay,
but that
okay.
is.
But they've touched here as part of a
Correct.
trip, 200. Okay.
So I will be including that, very similar to how we've done the YMCA invoices. That way, the city council can kind of track that in a more linear path, and that will be on your next agenda.
Always love a good report. Dwayne, you have something? No, you didn't.
I might just add that we were the initial people to put down all the bike sharrows. And I remember when the project was first being developed, that the cycle track and the shared paths all came together as one, and then the cycle track, the building out of like Armour, that was going to continue over a period of time. But if you'll notice that the shared bike paths do intersect with all of the other cycle track, I should say. So I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Perfect. Thank you. I couldn't let you sit here and not say anything. I don't know why I'm pointing at you. Can you go one slide forward, please? So I guess I'll look for some sort of affirmative action here from council on what exactly you want to do. Do you want to make someone want a motion approving these recommended highlighted things, which are House Street use path north, House Street shared use path south, and shared lane markings?
I would move to approve with.
Move to recommend. We'll move to recommend.
Move to recommend, but add the two projects as one project.
There we go.
As
Okay.
in, do them at the same time, not two separate phases. Hal, yeah.
All right. Do we have a second on that?
Second, I do have a
And
comment.
now we will do more Councilmember
there-
Clark.
To piggyback off of, I was sent comments ahead of the meeting, but, and I believe Roberta was also questioning about how it would affect the parking along Howell. And I don't know that I have
I
a.
don't know yet. It really depends on which side we're going to go with.
Okay.
So we don't know.
And
It
go
might
back
not.
one slide again. Sorry, I'm one back. Okay, that starts at. We're talking starting at Clark
32nd
Ferguson.
Avenue.
We're talking
to
about
Clark
starting
Ferguson.
We're talking
32nd
32nd
Avenue.
down.
32nd to Clark Ferguson is the how, and so I remember seeing a very early, maybe even it was a rendering of some kind where the shared use path is where that sidewalk outside of Mackin Park is, and the parking was actually shifted into where now the bump outs are. So the bump outs went away, parking at the park shifted westward, and there was a wider path along the edge of Mackin Park. Now,
Are you able to? Is that in the bike master plan? I feel like that image is in there. Is it not?
I don't think it's in the bike
Okay,
master
I don't know.
plan, but that's
I
how
didn't see
I
it.
picture it too. Like to try to maintain, I would think there is area from particular 32nd to Clark Ferguson along Mackin Park. If we chose the east side, which it makes more sense to widening the existing sidewalk or just make it convert into a shared use path, it serves the proposed for our recreational area as well. If we were to look into the parking area, I don't think we're going to eliminate all of them. That's what I think is what I pictured.
Yeah.
And again, we'll have to finalize with the engineering designs. But worst case scenario, I think right now they are just a 90-degree parking. We can even explore with angled parking if necessary to kind of widening a little bit more, giving up more space over there for the to give up some parking aisles and over there. But definitely we can look at the bump outs, and I know there's definitely issues with the surface for the parking itself. It's deteriorating, and we can look into that as well when we're restriping and when we're resurfacing it. I think that would be a good opportunity for.
So a study marking the cost of replacing and rebuffing parking spots versus a shared use path. We
I
can do
will look
that
at it.
study.
I think we should include it all.
Yeah, no, so it sounds like the consideration is there for parking. It just may be a shift. And it's not, there's no plan to just make it go away.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Can I ask a favor?
please.
So
Somewhere.
all I have is recommend.
Okay, I'm sorry, it was recommended highlighted items. Well, I guess I'll let you speak it out.
Yeah, I
The
said
hi-
recommend, I didn't say the highlighted items, but I meant the highlighted items, but combining the Howe Street North and South as one project, so it's done at the same time and not in phases.
And doing the shared lane markings, which is at the bottom as well.
And then Amy seconded.
Thank you.
And then when she stops writing, I will. There we go. All right. Further council member comments? All in favor, please say yes.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Shu. Thank you, Dwayne. The rare appearance. Are you going to be here all meeting? Okay, we'll come up with some more for you. Number 9, request for proposals for transportation services, scope of work discussion. I think we just, again, want to revisit and further discuss what this RFP would look like for transportation services. It is abundantly clear we definitely need to be looking at our point-to-point service and reevaluating that and seeing if that's something we can take on as well. Councilmember Toll.
I requested that this come back before council. In our last discussion, I had advocated for an apples-to-apples RFP. And after I had some time to think about it, I decided that that was probably not the best that we could do. And I know that Councilman Smith had said, I wish we could do something that was better for our residents, but we couldn't think of how to RFP that. How would we look at that? And so I would propose that we do, oh, and I'm glad that you're still here, because Iris is we have no option. That's what they went to. So it wasn't a choice. It was something that changed with KCATA. So the service that we had was discontinued, and Iris was the option. So we do not have a choice to change that back if we stick with KCATA.
They wouldn't even let us fund it.
Yeah,
They said
you
it's
couldn't
done.
even fund it yourself. It's not an option. So that being in mind, and that service being something that our residents relied on, and the fact that the fixed route only went through once an hour anyhow, I would propose that we do an RFP for our own point-to-point service that takes you from North Kansas City to anywhere in North Kansas City, and additionally to the closest stops, which there are 3 stops for the fixed service. Now, Gladstone has thrown a wrench in that because they're running closed door through their service. So we would have to discuss whether that stopping point was really going to be in Gladstone, or if you would have to go beyond Gladstone, or if you would stop in Gladstone and use Gladstone service
Well,
from there.
the northern stop from here would be a Kansas City stop. On North Oak. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's several Kansas City
Oh,
stops.
that's not
where you
Gladstone yet.
No.
Oh,
That's
how it
Kansas
fingers
City.
in, it always confuses me.
I know, I always associate
so we're
Gladstone.
still,
It is
so
not
we're still
Gladstone.
good. So the plan would still work. Here's the advantage, I think, to doing that. It's not ideal, obviously, but what we've been given is also not ideal, as you pointed out. It's not working how it's supposed to work. And at least our vehicles taking people around from point to point within the city and those touch points just outside the city would be a dedicated vehicle for us here, however many vehicles we can have. Now, maybe it's not something that's feasible for the city to run, but maybe it is. So if we send out the RFP, I think that service could maybe meet all of our needs without running a fixed route and completely replace. But the fact is, going back pre-Iris isn't going to happen with KCATA. There's no possible way back. It's not an option. They won't even let us fund it. So that's off the table. Also, not providing public transportation is not an option. We have to have it. So we have these 7 months to see if there's a possibility of us doing it better than KCATA.
I had something that went so well, I don't even know. No, and there might be an opportunity, you know, I don't want to get too deep into future things happening, but, you know, to explore this maybe with other cities as well and look at expanding that sort of network. Councilmember Smith.
Well said. Thank you for that. I'm really glad this came back. As a dissenting member, I was not allowed to bring it back per Robert's rules, I believe. So I thank you for bringing this back. Part of the other reason that an apples to apples comparison doesn't really make a great deal of sense is we were more concerned with the fact that they were pushing off more than just the marginal cost of running through our city. And if we tried to stand up an entire fixed route and flex and everything else to match exactly, it was going to be very expensive and would pretty much hurt us in any sort of negotiation going forward. So I like this much better, going through a true point-to-point. And then the fact that Gladstone City Council did eliminate the fixed routes, and I watched that City Council meeting, and it was recommended by the KCATA that they get rid of their flexed route and go to Iris only, which puts the fixed route cost now on us. So they connect to, well, the next nearest stop, and if they come through North Kansas City, well, now we're paying for their residents to ride the fixed route bus. It's a big mess. KCATA is in shambles, and I'm very tired of dealing with all of it. I would like to see us RFP, as Lisa said, for a true point-to-point. And I understand that Gladstone may be talking with Z-Trip for something like this, but there seem to be services out there that can offer this. So very interested in that. The other part is I did go back, and I sent this to staff to disseminate. I went back to the March 7th council meeting. If anybody wants to pull that video up, when representatives from the KCATA came here to this podium, they pitched us Iris as a point-to-point transit system, on-demand point-to-point.
We'll slow it down at some point. We are talking the RFP for
That's
our future
fine.
RFP.
So
There you
I
go.
want something that's truly point-to-point.
Don't want to get too far. I know we threw Iris out there a few times, but didn't want to get too far down that road. Thank you. Oh, that's a head shake no. Okay, Councilmember Toll.
I know that we're talking about the RFP, but that was brought up by the citizen too, and I think it was an important point that they went back on what they originally sold, which I think also points out that they haven't been organized and straightforward from the beginning of the process, which is why it's important for us to do what we can in the time that we have to see what we can do on our own without disrupting service. We have service, it's not ideal service, but we definitely don't want a gap where there's no service. We can't do that.
All right. I think we got a plan enough. A plan enough. I got a thumbs up. Is there any? We'll go dissent this time. Anyone dissenting on this? There we go. Then we'll call that one good. Thank you. Number 10, Blue Cross Blue Shield of KC Insurance Premium Maximum Refund.
As you see, the numbers dwindled over the past 3 years, but over the past 3 years, we have done a benefit holiday. So we take the 2 benefit holidays in August, and we time that because it's back to school time. So we figured that's a good thing for our employees to have a little bit extra in their paycheck to be able to do school supplies and school shopping and all that fun stuff. We're proposing this year that we take the amount that we're getting and offering that as a benefit holiday for the 2 pay periods in August, and then the remaining goes back into the city's funds.
All right, so generally I would recommend approving this. I do think we should set a policy going forward because I think this should probably be an automatic thing. If employees are paying premiums and we're cost sharing that premium, then I think that should just by default happen. I don't think we should need to come to council to return money that people have paid into a program. I do believe it should be at the same ratio at which we pay in to it as well, but I do think you could streamline it from there. And if we're staying at an 80-20 match, why don't we just make it policy that this happens, because it is 80%, city dollars, 20% employee dollars. It does make sense to me that if we are getting a refund, we just take care of it. We just go ahead and reallocate it back out based the way it went in. Just throwing that out there. I saw Councilmember Tull first and Councilmember Smith.
Go ahead, I'll go next.
I agree with what you said. The question I have is the calculation doesn't pencil out to 80 and 20. It's 28.
In aggregate, yeah, so
70, okay.
it's 80/20 for the employee-only HSA. It fluctuates there.
Okay.
So it would be a very detailed calculation to get that money to go back aggregate, five. Yeah,
plans.
5
Okay.
plans.
So when
Or
I'm
coverage
looking at
categories.
staff portion of max refund, city portion, it pencils out to 72 and 28. Is
That's an
that
average.
the actual money that went in from staff and the actual money that went in from the city just going back to the people who paid it? Or is there a little bit extra going back towards staff?
Yes. Yes, there is.
Okay. And is that just because it would be too complicated to figure out
Yes.
exactly how much?
Just explain to me that this would be the dollar amount that would give everyone the health holiday. So they raise it to that amount to cover everybody.
Yes. Instead of doing the
That's why you get to that number.
Yes.
Okay. It's like an extra $4,000. It's not that big a deal.
But I do have a resolution maybe for a future meeting to just go ahead and streamline this, and we get a report after the fact, but don't have to talk about it. Councilmember.
He covered.
There we go. Okay. Nothing down here. All right. So since I'm taking motions for every, no, any dissent on carrying this out? Seeing none, we will. I guess will that come back to us then?
It doesn't need to come back. Yeah, just a motion.
I mean, I can take a motion if we just want to approve it. I mean, it's, yeah. Okay. Is there a motion to approve this?
Move to approve?
Second.
All in favor, please say yes.
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 All opposed, say no. Motion carries. There you go. That takes us to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve.
Second?
All in favor, please say yes.
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 All opposed, say no. That motion sounded like it carried. Weak on the yeses there. Number 13, parking restriction 2-hour west side of Clay, bill number 7785, ordinance number 9582. Anybody who's, we have any council questions on this? Maybe we just go right to
Move
it.
to approve?
Second.
All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Wait,
First reading.
first reading, thank you. Well, we were rescinding that last week. We are going for a first reading.
First reading.
Second.
All in favor, please say yes.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carries.
An ordinance restricting on-street parking to 2 hours on the west side of Clay Street between Armour Road and East 18th Avenue in the city of North Kansas City, Missouri, and directing the erection of appropriate signage limiting the parking of motor vehicles to 2 hours on said street.
I move that bill number 7785 be placed on second and final reading and pass as ordinance number 9582.
Second.
Okay, check one more time. No council member comments. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Saper?
Yes.
Councilmember Tull?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Fitzgerald?
Yes.
Councilmember Alvarez?
Yes.
Councilmember Clark?
Yes.
Councilmember Todd?
Yes.
An ordinance restricting on-street parking to 2 hours on the west side of Clay Street between Armour Road and East 18th Avenue in the city of North Kansas City, Missouri, and directing the erection of appropriate signage limiting the parking of motor vehicles to 2 hours on said street.
Number 14, short-term rental zoning text amendments, bill number 7786, ordinance number 9583. Shoo.
So this is a zoning text amendment in front of you. This particular piece touches the definition of what is a short-term rental as defined by the city when this ordinance is passed, and related terms that's being discussed in this particular regulation. This text amendment will set regulations and implementation policies and in the laws of how we are going to move forward. So this particular zoning ordinance has been discussed by Planning Commission. First started in April the 6th, 2023, and has been continued twice. And so 3 discussion has been occurred with public hearings. And now this particular discussion, I'm just following the timeline over here and jump over through it. This particular discussion is in July as the dot at the bottom, as you can see, for the adoption of proposed text amendment by City Council. I would like to highlight a few steps or milestones through this particular process. Because this is not a ordinary periodic zoning text amendment. This is a particular subject that has been involved a lot of staff research and peer studies. Essentially, we have done a lot of consulting and working with the particular organizations that near us in this region, and we have also conducted city council work sessions with asking questions of what do you all feel about short-term rental, what kind of policy would you like to see. That was that happened back in the December 2022. And then we also hosted a similar discussion with the Planning Commission before staff even drafted the ordinance. And then after we hearing from City Council and Planning Commission, staff started the initial draft. The draft was completed by March this year. And then staff has hosted an open house at City Hall, open to the public to gather more information with the proposed language being posted. And quite a few council members have attended that open house along with the community. And we have heard directly from the community concerns and their opinions on short-term rental, which all kind of reflect in this particular piece that staff has been working on. And then we brought the first draft to Planning Commission in April, and Planning Commission has gave some of their opinions after their discussion, and then recommended to continue it to their May meeting. And so in the May meeting, staff brought the second draft back, which was not largely changed from the initial draft. The Planning Commission has discussed more in-depth questions and directed the staff to make some significant changes to that particular draft. So that draft was brought back in June for the final recommendation. So this particular draft is the recommended draft by the Planning Commission that in front of you. They have recommended approval unanimously. I would like to go through some of the detailed language over here, so just make sure there are a lot of first-time readers, maybe watching Channel 2, and as a benefit for you all as well to understand what this particular ordinance will bring to the community and why are we proposing this particular item. So as you all know, short-term rental is not a permitted use in our current city ordinance because this particular use is not described in zoning code, and it is determined by zoning code that any non-described zone particular uses in the zoning code has to be amended to be able to be a permitted use. So for all the existing short-term rentals, they're theoretically, we cannot treat them as legal non-conforming or grandfathered in. However, we understand there are particular interests we're trying to protect. That's why in this particular ordinance, there is a language we're going to deal with what we're going to do with the existing short-term rentals. But get back to the description of the use itself. What is a short-term rental? It is a lodging type of use, so that's why we determine it as lodging short-term rental. It means a rental of a property, a dwelling unit, or even an accessory dwelling unit, or a portion of any of this type for a period of time that's less than 30 consecutive days. So if you're renting it on 60 days, 90 days, or a year, those are not short-term rental, those are long-term rental. We don't particularly call it long-term rental, it's just our regular rental. And then there are a few defined terms in this particular ordinance. We have owner, what is an owner, and what is owner-occupied mean. So I would like to highlight what does owner-occupied mean. It means a dwelling unit that is occupied by the owner as their primary residence. So when later on you're asking owner-occupied short-term rental, does that mean the owner have to leave there, stay there while they're hosting? It doesn't necessarily mean that. The owner can be on a vacation for a couple weeks and rented it out as far as this is their primary residence. And non-owner occupied, of course, it's not occupied by the owner as their primary residence. And then when we talk about the particular use standards, the first item is where do we allow the short-term rental? So the approved space for short-term rental can include any individual bedrooms in the principal building, sharing common entrance, kitchen facilities, and living areas with the primary residence. It can be a approved accessory dwelling unit on the property. So we do have an accessory dwelling unit ordinance currently regulated by zoning code, It has to be an approved accessory dwelling unit, though, so the city it has to be a legally approved one to start with. And also, the short-term rental can be hosted for the entirety of the property. Like you can rent out your entire property for short-term rental. And then the second part is where is short-term rental permitted? So our current proposed ordinance, the short-term rental is permitted in R1A, R1B, R2, R3, R4, R5. These are all residential zoning districts. In CIO, that's a first class of the commercial type, which is a mix of commercial and office use particularly, and C1. So we do not allow short-term rental in C2, C3, and anything above, like M district. The reason for that is because those particular zoning districts are for particular buildings built for their particular standards, not for residential purposes. Yes.
I meant to ask you before the meeting, but can you pull up a zoning map while you go through that?
I meant to print one too.
Okay, I can, and I would actually like to show you all how to find it. I did not put it in a PowerPoint. My apology. So if you go to our NKC website, you go to government, and with the drop-down menu, you go to community development. There is a planning and zoning component over here. And so if you go down here, we do have an interactive zoning map. It will lead you to an outsourced link. Of course, disclaimer. It will show you our base zoning over here. So here's the legend, if you wanted to see it. Residential generally are colored in yellow, beige, this particular tone, and brown. The lighter the color is, the less density it is. So for R1A, it typically means a single-family residential in a traditional single-family neighborhood. And R1B is a single-family residential in a compact style. So they have smaller lots, narrower lots, but they're still single-family character. R2, R3, R4, R5, they're usually allowing a higher density of building types for residential. So R1A and R1B are generally the avenue area over here, as you can see, and a little bit on the other side of the high school, as well as the River Forest area. Shall we move forward? And feel free to ask questions. So, as I mentioned earlier, the short-term rental is permitted in all our district, CIO and C1, except that for R1A and R1B, there is a extra layer for short-term rental. So in R1A and R1B, there is an A type, which is owner-occupied, and a B type, which is non-owner occupied. You can read it, but generally what it's saying is for R1A and R1B, the city only allows owner-occupied dwelling units to run short-term rental unless you are running short-term rental before the passage of this ordinance. And you'll have to register with the city within 30 days and show the burden of proof is on the applicant as well. Yes.
I had a question there on the right language, but the carve out for the item 2B there for the non-owner occupied. If those properties are sold in the future, I guess I'm trying to get an idea of how long does that stay in place?
So if there is a change of ownership, they have to submit their registration form with the city. There is a part of the language later on talking about that. Any changes, you have to let the city know. We will need a new registration form. When we're looking at this, they don't lose the status. We're looking at it as a non-conforming. I'll say it this way, even though they're not. So the change of the ownership is not the criteria we use to disqualify them from running short-term rental. The criteria we use is if the use is being discontinued. In other words, as far as the use is still active, the transfer of the ownership does not impact their capability for running short-term rental.
Just kind of put that, like, clear that up a little. So if you have a short-term rental and you take that to, let's say you buy it and move your family in, you're just living in it, or otherwise you do a long-term rental, you would say then that disqualifies it in the future from being a non-owner occupied dwelling.
Can you repeat that again?
So if you take take one of these non-owner occupied dwellings we currently market as that, and that house gets sold and transferred to someone else, and I decide to move my family in there, and then in 3 years I want to do an Airbnb, would I be allowed to do that if I don't live there?
No, you would not be.
Likewise, if I did it as a long-term rental, I bought it and then decided to long-term rent it because the change of use is occurring.
Because you changed
then
the
that
use.
disqualifies it.
Because
Okay.
the short-term rental itself is its own use. It's distinguished from a long-term rental. So meaning if it's not owner occupied, you bought it from somebody who's running a short-term rental, you have to run this short-term rental and continue this use. Anytime you changed it from a short-term rental to a long-term rental, you lose that status of continue using it. However, if you continue the short-term rental, but you decide, I want to live in here still, I'm just an owner occupied at this point, you don't lose that Does that make sense? Because it's still a short-term rental,
Yeah, so
regardless of,
as long as you keep it a short-term rental, it can be sold,
Right.
sold.
as long as it's a short-term
As long as
rental,
that's
kept
all
as
that
a
happens with the
short-term
property.
rental.
Perfect, okay.
But you have to update your information and fill out new registration form and for inspection with the city.
But if someone doesn't fill out a form, would that be assumed then to not be a short-term rental anymore?
Yes.
Okay. Further. Okay.
And then so number 3 over here is talking about only one short-term rental contract can be permitted at a time per one approved short-term rental application, and no more than one dwelling unit for rental registration, including both short and long-term rental that can be permitted per dwelling unit. Meaning, if you are running a long-term rental, can you also have a short-term rental? Like I rent out a 1-bedroom for a long-term rental and rent out another bedroom for short-term rental. The answer is no, you can only have one rental unit per time.
So,
And-
okay, I guess I'll clarify because some people may have questions on like a duplex sort of situation. But we're defining a dwelling as each side of that duplex.
Right. For a
Yeah,
duplex, it's
okay.
a 2-dwelling unit.
Yeah.
There is a definition of a dwelling unit in our code already that tells you what's a dwelling unit.
Perfect.
So that's why we say regardless of building type. So you might be,
Where I got the call on that.
And then number 4 is when you talk about the contact information for the owner, registrant, or local emergency contact needs to be posted within each dwelling unit. This is a purpose for the safety and emergency contact reasons. Number 5 to 9, generally these are requirements for the intention of building code enforcement over here. I will mention them briefly. Number 5 is talking about how a map should be provided for any multi-unit building, for any emergency events, that for people to evacuate safely over here. Number 6 is talking about the interconnected smoke and carbon monoxide detectors needs to be installed. And this is a pretty large ticket item, I would just say to everybody, just make sure you guys all understand it. Most of the time, residential properties, they have individual carbon monoxide detectors or smoke detectors, meaning you might have one detector being set off, the other detectors do not set off at the same time. And this is because the residential building code requires have a different set of requirement as commercial building code. And particularly for lodging facilities, we look at it as more of a commercial type of building. That the reason for that is because for lodging facilities, the host who might know this facility very well, whereas your customers might, or your people who stay over here might not really knows this particular facility or the environment very well or familiar with it. So we want to make sure they can get out of the dangerous situation as soon as possible. So we're using a standard lodging facilities requirement per building code over here. So In other words, if you were to apply for short-term rental and you'll have to go through an inspection, you have to upgrade your smokers and carbon monoxide detectors to make sure they're interconnected by wires, and you probably have to turn down some of the ceilings and go through all that process to upgrade them. I just want to make sure everybody understands this requirement. And number 7 is fire extinguisher. That is required over here, as well as battery-powered flashlight or any other emergency lighting device. And usually these are checked by our building code official through the inspection time as well. Just make sure the egress and the exiting is clearly lighted and demonstrated. Number 8 over here is we're talking about how many people can be hosted for a short-term rental. The requirement over here is 2 person per each bedroom, plus 1 additional person per dwelling unit, but no more than 6 per short-term rental over here. A big component for that is the consideration by building code itself. So this one actually is a similar language to Kansas City, Missouri's requirement as well.
Councilmember Tulloch.
Yes.
It's not to exceed 8, correct? You said 6, okay. I just wanted
8.
to make sure.
It's not to exceed 8. And the number 9 over here is we do not allow food service to be provided over here, meaning the host will likely to use the kitchen as a commercial kitchen to provide any food service for the tenants themselves. But they can use the cooking facility, they just cannot provide any food service.
Can you remind me where that one came in, why that one came into play?
This
Number
one?
9.
Number 9?
Yeah.
We have
Oh.
this in the initial draft, and it is also a largely discussed topic. I think you guys initially brought it up. What does that mean? What does no food service being provided? It comes as a building code requirement, as a concern of how we use
Yeah, go
cooking
ahead.
facility.
Yeah, just to flavor that one a little bit, the original one said no food. And
Yeah.
I asked, like, can we put out cookies or chips
Yeah.
or something? So there's no prepared food.
No prepared food
Yeah, yeah,
services
okay.
over there. Right. So the language definitely got longer and longer, but I think it gets clear as well. Number 10 over here is generally, it's a very general requirement over here that no signage to advertise a short-term rental should be allowed to the exterior. We don't want people identifying and spot the short-term rental on the street. That will impact our neighborhood characteristic. Number 11 over here is talking about the short-term rental may not be rented or offered for use as any party space or meeting space, because we don't want to become an event space. Number 12 over here is talking about the registration process itself, how the applicant can register with the city, what are the required information to be provided. There are a lot of details of it. I would like to mention one of the highlighted words over here, that is the owner shall reside within 30 miles of the city limit. This is a requirement across the board. It doesn't matter if it is owner or non-owner occupied short-term rental. The owner has to live within 30 miles of the city limits. And when you map a 30-mile city limits, it generally includes the KC metro area. And the reason for that is the Planning Commission has been discussed that we wanted to, and they're very clear to provide the guidance that we wanted to disencourage out-of-town owners to turn our housing inventory into moneymakers. And then number 13 is talking about the registration fee. There is an initial $200 registration fee set upon, and a yearly registration fee of, or yearly renewal fee of $200. And if a late renewal fee is to be charged, then we can charge them $50 per month at this point. And the registration would always kick in on January the 1st with a grace period running to January 31st. Then number 14 is talking about how the dwelling unit shall comply all applicable laws. Number 15 is talking about upon the registration, the applicant shall receive an inspection and approval from Community Development Department and our fire department to make sure it meets the minimum safety standards and building code requirement. Number 16 is talking about the authority that staff would have in this particular process, that it's generally an administrative approval authority, meaning staff reviews it and approves it. It doesn't need to go through city council for every single application. However, if the applicant cannot meet all the requirements that listed in this particular section, they can go through a conditional use permit process as highlighted in our section 17.08.030. And for the ones that don't really have the knowledge of what a conditional use permit process look like, it is essentially a entitlement process, and it goes through City Planning Commission and then recommended by City Planning Commission to City Council. City Council makes the final decision. It does require public notification and public hearing, so there's an extra layer for it. This way, we want to make sure we're making a wise decision. Number 17 over here is talking about short-term rental is subject to business license requirement, because essentially the nature of it is a business. Number 18 is talking about the dwelling unit shall display the certificate that the city issues at their property. And then number 19 is talking about short-term rental will be prohibited in a dwelling unit that receives city incentives. The purpose for that is we want to encourage that the city incentivize the properties to remain in their own home ownership, and we don't want to duplicate and double dip the city incentives over in this case.
Member Toll.
I just wanted some clarification on what would count for that, because we have city initiatives in apartments, let's say maybe, but also we have programs where you can apply for grants to have updated things done to your home. What sort of programs or incentives are we talking about?
So over here, we have a extended language here saying that any city incentives or located within a structure or upon a parcel that receives the city incentives. Such incentives may include any economic incentives granted by the city or any economic development agency created by the city in the nature of capture and redirection, abatement, or exemption of taxes, or the insurance of or the issuance of bonds or grants by the city or other city-backed financing. So in this case, I think the financing tool we largely use over here are the Chapter 100 that you guys have went through.
Yeah, I think the intent was like one-time sort of things that would be allowed. I think to what you're saying to the grant, that was the intent at least. But if you were getting a Chapter 100 where you're on a continuous property tax abatement or redirection or whatever, then that would be where it's a no. Until such time that rolls off and that no longer applies, because then you would be able to do it when you're no longer on any sort of city incentive. So I would think a one-time grant, you're not really on a city incentive over some period of time. It just happens.
Okay.
Right, and the grant that you mentioned, like maybe home repair grants that they receive, it is not literally a redirection or abatement or exemption of any tax or issuance of the bonds.
Okay.
That's
That's
not
just
the
what I
purpose
wanted
behind
clarified,
it.
because it's a financial support, but not a tax-related financial support.
And then number 20 over here is talking about that, any change in the ownership or registration information, like some of you guys asked earlier, that will require a new registration to be filed within 30 days of such change. And then number 21 is talking about the violation of any of these requirement will result in fines, no less than $200, but no more than $500, and we might count each day as a separate offense, meaning it can be accumulated. But we also said that typically we require them to take action or correspond with the city within 30 days. So it's not like we find anything not in compliance today, and then we'll bill you $200 tomorrow. We will have definitely a due process over here as well. And then number 22 is talking about the city remains its rights to deny, suspend, or revoke any license, and for legit reasons. And if a license being suspended, or revoked, or denied, the applicant may not be able to apply again within 2 years. So we just want to make sure they take it seriously. Number 23 over here is talking about, because it's a lodging facility, so we will have short-term rental be subject to our hotel motel transient guest tax, which is 5% as for now. And then number 24, which is the last one over here, is talking about any additional requirement that the Community Development Department Director determines that shall be asked by the director as a requirement for the applicant.
Perfect, thank you.
Any
So I'll open it up
questions?
for discussion. In general, I'll say I think the Planning Commission, as noted, did a thorough job of coming up with, I think, a fair ordinance and some good compromise that both address community concerns of having commercial activity in single-family neighborhoods, while also allowing short-term rentals, which, as you noted, are currently not legal, to begin operating legally. What else? As noted at the beginning, this text was recommended for passage unanimously by the Planning Commission after 3 meetings and many amendments later, and I would also recommend passage as presented on this text as well. Councilmember Smith.
All right, so I have a number of thoughts on this one, and I do sit on the Planning Commission as well, and I would like to commend the Planning Commission for a lot of thoughtful discussion, and as you see, a lengthy list that came out of a lot of back and forth and good faith negotiations. With that said, I go back to the first step in the chain where we brought this to council, it was back December of '22. And at that point, it was a different council, but the council at that time didn't express much interest in limiting the activities of short-term rentals. We spoke about it being sort of net neutral with some good aspects. Family members can come and stay, and it was an overall benefit to the community. Brought in some tourism, brought in some things that are desirable here and meet some of the master plan items. When it came to the Planning Commission, there was a bit of a different tone. It was more toward regulating or eliminating short-term rentals. And the way this has shaken out through 3 rounds of edits is it works as almost a de facto ban on newer short-term rentals, and it gives a narrow window for the existing ones to continue, which is an odd carve-out to me. So during the second meeting, it mentions, if we even go back to the timeline, during the second meeting, it says that the Planning Commission worked out where if they were already operating as a short-term rental, they could continue. What was actually agreed on at that meeting was if they were registered as a rental property and had been doing what they were supposed to at that time, not as an operating short-term rental, which, as we pointed out, was illegal at the time. For example, if somebody was operating a long-term rental with a desire to eventually potentially turn it into a short-term rental, they wouldn't have been operating as a short-term, and they would not now have the opportunity to do so. And if they had been, they would have been operating outside the law. And now this is giving a carve-out to those who chose to operate outside the law to continue to do so now legally, which is an odd carve-out to me. So that the Section 2B, where it allows them to continue, I think warrants some further discussion and consideration. Yeah, right there. So if it has been used as a short-term rental prior to the passage date of this ordinance and the applicant can prove documentary evidence to the satisfaction, which means they were literally operating outside of the law, rather than having been registered as a rental property and abiding by the laws of the city. The next piece is we had an email come in from one of our residents who mentioned a couple of lawsuits that have recently been looked at. One in New Orleans, which was a year or so ago, that a federal circuit court held that New Orleans could not restrict these rentals. And then one in New York City where Airbnb actually sued New York and they discontinued their regulations, or they rolled them back because of pending litigation. In addition to that, I'm curious about the cost to regulate and enforce this. We didn't have that on the slideshow.
I would like to mention that. I was about to discuss about it. So for short-term rental, I have discussed with my building code official what's the staff commitment to this particular regulation. Any regulation you're passing, there's definitely an enforcement to it, and which will add staff timing and commitment to it. So we have calculated, based on our projection of short-term rental, We do have calculated about 1.5 personnel over here at this particular time. This particular personnel, or 1.5 personnel, is not going to only deal with short-term rental because there is an inspection component of it, which will kick in some staff time over here. And we would likely to consider part of that to be a job for our current inspector who's doing long-term rental inspection, because a lot of the nature of the work is similar. And with that said, I would like to mention that, keep in mind, we have some new apartments that not so new anymore, like the backyard apartments, and we will have One North apartment, 23rd Swift apartment. Usually they don't require rental inspection within the first 3 to 5 years. However, when they pass that period of time, the city will start to inspect them annually. So with that number of units that we have being added to the city, I think 1.5 personnel is what we budgeted reasonably for the future consideration.
Do we have a dollar cost attached to 1.5 personnel?
I haven't talked to our financial officer yet, but Kim might be able to shine some light on us.
We'll be kind of discussing that as part of the upcoming budget process. Again, some of the things that we're trying to provide to council for their deliberation is what does our operational costs, which are personnel, in the next 0 to 5 years. That way we can kind of get an understanding. We did have the conversation about dispatchers, and kind of during that conversation we talked about as our city grows, our organization might need to look at what staffing requirements come with that growth.
Okay. It's hard to, because we're looking to approve this or make some amendments tonight without a dollar attached to it, which is a little tricky. There's no even ballpark? Like, I don't know what 1.5 person hours dollars means.
Right, 1.5 meaning we just take a look at the average salary and plus all the city benefits over here. So for this particular position, we think it's an entry level over here for our inspectors, and because it doesn't really require a lot of certificates and stuff like that. So we have run a rough number on it. We thought it's about $90,000 per year per personnel, and so 1.5 times of that, we're talking about $135,000.
So, and
Felt
again,
like 5 hands go up there.
No,
Okay.
that
I'll let you
particular
first.
person would also take on those long-term rentals. So that
Right.
growth is going to happen, as Shu has mentioned. We have a lot of rental, apartment complexes that are going to be kind of ellipsing that 3 to 5 year that will require annual inspections. So that
I guess a follow-up on that.
growth-
What
Let me
ratio
finish
do you
that.
believe will be the long-term
Yes.
versus the short-term
I haven't
rental?
get there yet. Let me finish it. So $135,000 is what we thought for 1.5 personnel. And this personnel, the ratio we thought for this short-term rental is 30% of this personnel to 70% of the rest of this personnel's job, which including regular annual inspection and enforcement as well. Because it's not just an annual inspection for any of the rental properties. When people are here and there's issues, then they come up with complaints, and we have to go investigate, and we'll have to bring the code compliance component to it as well. And that actually takes more staff time than just the inspection itself. So we are looking at 30-70%. So 30% of $135,000, we're talking about probably
40,000.
$40,000. You guys do math better than me, for sure.
So 40K is the number we're
That's what we're
working
looking
with?
at.
Okay. Okay. The other part is section 13 is the $200 registration fee. It feels high comparative to other fees around, like, what does a liquor license cost? Or what does a business license cost? Like, what are these costs? How does that relate? 200 is a fairly large number.
Well, I have to say the business license, it's its own component. It will still be required for short-term
Right,
rental.
in
They have to get
addition
the
to, yeah.
addition. It
Yeah.
is an addition. The registration fee over here, I look at it more of like what is the administrative approval fee table that we have currently. Like we do have a fee table for site plan reviews. We do have a fee table for any conditional use permit, plats, and all of that. And 200 is about the average, I would say.
Okay, that's about the average.
And
Okay.
really, the registration fee, I would say, part of it is how much staff time will be involved in reviewing all those information over there. So for short-term rental, because we have a lot of regulations and requirements over here, staff does have to check on. There is a long list of checklists that we'll have to go through, staff that have to look at the details over here.
Okay.
And this is also part of the budgeted 30% of this personnel's time.
So the piece that I would focus in on mostly is the grandfathering of the existing ones. That's the one that seems oddest to me. And grandfathering may not be the right term, but allowing them to continue to operate. It seems like the Planning Commission recommendation to allow properties that have been registered as rental properties prior, and that may not include some of the ones that have been operating as short-term rentals. So if they haven't been filling out the form, coming to community development, doing the things they're supposed to be doing, that maybe those should not be allowed to continue, and the ones that have been but have not been operating as short-term should be allowed to continue or should be allowed to pursue that use. That's my personal thought on it, and I'd be open to.
I would just note that this is something I was kind of in supportive of. As you do bring up lawsuits, I do think this reduces the risk of getting into sort of situations where you take something away what someone thinks they have, although that is an illegal business we've established many times. And if you go to do a long-term registration, find out you can't do short-term, well, then you probably shouldn't have done it, but some people did it anyways. I don't think it's perfect. I don't necessarily think it's right, but I think it gives a clear path to passing the rest of the policy and continuing forward. We'll go with Councilmember Todd here. Councilmember Toll. Councilman, whoever wants to go. There you go.
Yeah, I just want to clarify one thing. So what you're suggesting is if there was a place that was a rental, long or short term, that they then are all sort of allowed to short term rent moving forward.
Correct. And if they've been registered and submitting the paperwork and doing what they were supposed to have done all along, that they would be allowed to be a non-owner occupied.
So current short-term rentals that are not registered that way because they couldn't have been, you're saying, should not be allowed to continue?
Potentially. I mean, they may have registered as a rental property at some point and then converted to short-term rental, so they were already registered and they would have the opportunity to continue, but some are just there. They're not registered as anything, and they've been operating outside of the regulatory scheme of anything here.
Yes, and I think probably most of the current short-term rentals are in that category. I'm going to throw a wrench into things and say that I actually don't love the idea of grandfathering any sort of short-term rentals, but that's in large part, again, because as I sit in this seat, I can't think for just myself, and I can't talk about just myself as a community member, but I have an entire ward of residents who feel very strongly about short-term rentals in general, and they are not in favor of having short-term rentals at all. I do think, and I applaud the Planning Commission for coming up with what I think is a good compromise of things between having nothing available at all and having some options available. I do think having, duplexes and multifamily units available, having people able to rent out their basements if they want to, or an accessory dwelling unit. Those options are still available. There are many people who wouldn't even want those available. I think this is a good compromise between the two. But if I were going to amend anything, I would not be in favor of allowing more short-term rentals moving forward, only because I just don't think it serves the community better than a long-term renter or homeowner in the community who can contribute long-term to the community. I got on just to see what is out there in North Kansas City right now. And out of the 15 I looked at, only one was over 50% booked for the current month. 0 out of the 15 were more than 20% booked for the next 4 months. And so we're talking about homes that are mostly vacant throughout the year. And so a lot of kind of what we've heard is that this is, bringing tourism and it's bringing money to North Kansas City, and that people might come and they might want to buy and they might want to stay. But I have long-term renters in my ward right now who have made actually multiple attempts to buy a home in North Kansas City because they love it so much, and they cannot. They get outbid. Homes are going, far over asking. Everything's being waived, and people who are currently living and contributing in our city now can't continue to rent. They're getting priced out of their homes. They can't purchase a home when they want to stay long-term. And so when I think about my obligation as a council member sitting at this table, I have to think about the residents that I serve in my ward. And when I am voting and speaking on their behalf, I feel that it's just, I'm obligated to do what is in their best interest and in the best interest of the community long-term, not necessarily short-term. I do really appreciate all of the people who have shared their thoughts and opinions, some that agree with me, some that don't, some very vehemently. And even, I do want to point out, Sean Stokes, thank you so much for sending an email with lots of great thoughts. But I do want to point out a few things that Sean took the time to kind of discuss. And he talks about, the 15 short-term rentals that are out right now, talking about how they make up 0.5%. So when we talk about an impact on our community in a positive light, that is so negligible. If we had 15 additional long-term residents who could be participating in the Parks and Rec activities that we have going on, who can come to our council meetings and have input, who can send their kids to the public schools, to me, that is what builds this community long-term. And so I would not be in favor of any amendment that allows more short-term rentals than what we have.
Councilmember Toole, and then we'll go Councilmember Fitzgerald.
I'm going to start with some of the things I like about this plan, which is I think it limits having investors come in, buy up properties, and do short-term rentals from afar. I think that's very important, and I like that. I also am stuck on, and I know that it was a compromise, and I know that the Planning Commission did a lot of great work, but stuck on rewarding properties for breaking the rules. I'm a rule follower, and that really kind of gets me the wrong way. Also, I kind of had in my head that that would discontinue if that property changed hands. And I understand now that that does not discontinue if the property, so these 15 properties are like golden tickets. It's, I'm not a big fan of that. I maybe could wrap my head around it as a form of compromise if it didn't stay with the property indefinitely as long as the use didn't change. But since it stays with the property indefinitely, that just seems incredibly unfair to people that chose to follow the rules.
I would just note, because I talked about that one earlier, it does seem like that kind of went with some of the community feedback I generally seem to be receiving in some of the survey data. Like, generally people are fine with some of the quantity that exists. They just don't want the expansion. So that's kind of why I landed there as well, too, because people just seem to be okay with what's existing, don't want to see much additional without additional regulation. So that was kind of, factoring in community kind of comments into that as well. But I'm just throwing that out there.
I also need to disclose that I live in a neighborhood that the HOA does not allow you to have a short-term rental. So I want people to know that as I'm talking about it. I personally live in a place where this rule is taken care of by an HOA. So I don't want somebody to come back and be like, well, you already have it. But I understand the concern about community, and that those 15 houses, if we look at it as, oh, it's not very much, it's only this small percentage, we don't need to worry about it, well, we could flip the coin and say, well, those 15 houses could be permanent residents that are here all the time. That being said, I'm not opposed to going forward. I just cannot support giving these golden tickets, these 15 properties that continue to be grandfathered in regardless of change of hands.
Councilmember Fitzgerald. Then we'll go Clark. Then I think I saw you at the corner of my eye.
I agree with a lot of the points that have been made already. One thing I wanted to add as a, resident and representative of Ward 3, I was looking on the Airbnb website today. I counted 14 of these in North Kansas City, and 7 were in Ward 3. And with the, small houses and how close the proximity is in our ward, I think this has a disproportionate impact on Ward 3. Because that I'm hesitant. I don't like the idea of allowing any more. I kind of agree with Lisa where on one hand, I understand maybe it's an attempt to avoid a lawsuit by leaving in this exception, for the 15 that are there, but I don't necessarily want to reward them either. I wouldn't be opposed to pulling that out and leaving the rest of the text as written. There's all the points are good too about, these are 15 or so residences. It's really hard to buy a house down here, and maybe it's just a small way, but it can allow more people to live in North Kansas City that want to be a long-term part of our community. What else? Just also zoning-wise, when I bought a house in a residential area, I expected to live next to, long-term residents, not in and out every week. So because of those factors, I think I'd like to suggest as is, but remove that to be claw out paragraph.
Okay, if we want to start doing motions and stuff, we might want to get a first and second on the floor, then we can start amending what's going on. So if someone wants to go ahead and do a first read, we can start throwing amendments out there and start voting on them too. We can go either way. You still have the floor at the moment. So if you want to start that process,
Can I
I'm working
propose
towards
a
amendments.
first reading as is, or first?
You can do a first reading, there'll be a second, we'll open it back up to all the comments, we're not going anywhere, but if you
Okay,
want to
so
start making further amendments.
First reading.
And is there a second?
Second reading.
Okay, there's a second. Okay, so now we're going to go back to exactly where okay, Councilmember Clark, but the next thing can be starting to make amendments. There you go.
I'm not a fan either of the grandfathering in. I know when I read sort of rental things, when my neighbor was renting their house, I did read that there was like a fine per day if you weren't registered. It could be like $25 a day and things like that. So it just doesn't settle well to think like those people that have been operating, without any sort of registration or payment to the city whatsoever, because I believe they haven't been taxed or anything. It's kind of kept in house. That there's no sort of penalty. It's just sort of like, and I would strike down as well that they can just hand off that house as like a golden ticket has been mentioned. That just doesn't settle well with me as the way we want to frame this. Is just kind of like, break the rules and then you'll be rewarded, and then we'll sort of change the rules for anybody else going forward. So that's my 2 cents to kind of in agreement.
Councilmember Smith. Then Toll.
Everybody's making wonderful points. This is a thorny one for me because I get a lot of calls from folks who have invested a great deal of time, money, and effort in buying, upgrading in many cases, furnishing, and then standing these up as short-term rentals, despite not having clear guidance that they are or are not illegal. We've talked about it through this process that they're outside the law, but it wasn't particularly clear from an outsider to look at that, look at them as illegal. So I agree that they shouldn't continue on sale. Like once the property is sold and it changes hands, I think that should cut it off. But if we're going to make this move, it feels a bit unfair to rug pull those that have, made the investments. So I would agree to. I think it's number 13? Can you?
One down. What do we got?
No. Keep going. Keep going. Yeah, 20. I think that's the clause that kind of allows it to continue. Change of ownership or registration shall require a new registry. Something to clarify that once it's sold, it can't continue. But for lawsuit purposes as well, allowing them to, at least the 15 that are operating.
I'm sorry. Okay, Councilmember Toll, Councilmember Todd, and then we'll go. Councilmember Safer.
We've mentioned it a lot of times, but I haven't actually heard from you. We know that there's 15 operating outside of the rules. What is the penalty?
We've talked about it from our first meeting in December last year. So currently, we have about 15 to 20 short-term rental. And when I gave the background of it, I said, we do not have any enforcement on them at this point, unless there is a legit complaint about it for whatever reason, like if it's a noise or anything, so we go and
So we don't
investigate.
have the
We-
structure in place to do anything about it.
Right.
Currently.
The reason for that is because Mayor mentioned earlier, this is clearly like a loophole in the code because there is
Okay.
never a such use be defined.
Then I
and
would
discussed.
double down on taking 2B out. So how would I amend the motion?
You would go
to
ahead and make
eliminate 2B?
make a motion now to
No.
amend removing B.
I
Well,
amend-
make the full, I don't know what,
Well,
I can't see,
have
what are the sections, subsections?
I have a motion and a second on the floor.
That's on the whole thing. Now we can go into amendments,
Well,
right?
don't we need to vote on that? Okay, we don't, okay.
No.
I
Yeah,
move
we
to
just move some
approve.
action. It is on the floor, right? No, I need the yes, no's first to get it on the floor. Officially, I need the yes, no's, right? Or I can start amendments.
There's been no
I can
vote.
start amendments. Okay, so we have the item's active here. We can start amendments. And your amendment is?
I move that we amend by eliminating 2B.
Okay, is there a second on that motion?
Second.
Okay. Now I will open it up for additional conversation, and then we'll take a vote. Councilmember Todd.
Yes, I was just going to add on to Jesse's point too. I do understand that people do invest time, energy, money. Anytime you start a business venture, it is costly and it is a risk. I do also think that most people, if they decided to sell tomorrow, would make a profit. I also think they could long-term rent where we could have a permanent resident. They could cover the mortgage costs. And again, they still are getting the equity in that home. And so I don't feel that removing that 4B would be pulling the rug from anyone. It simply is a correction to a mistake that's been made and an oversight, in my opinion.
Further councilmember comments before we take a vote here? Councilmember Saper.
To put it in maybe a little simpler terms, if someone has invested in a fence that's 20 feet high in front of their property, that's outside the law. That's outside what's permitted under our codes. And they would be forced to remove it. Simple as that. These people have been operating outside of what's permitted. And so they just have to bear the burden of removing themselves from that category. Simple as that.
Further councilmember comments? Councilmember Smith.
So, yeah, I totally understand the logic you're using there. If the code said no short-term rentals, and they did it anyway, I would feel the same way. The code's silent on it. So in that void, people have opened up and made these investments, not to contravene something written, but because it's not there, and it's a little more.
Well,
Absolutely.
take turns.
And it's a little more nuanced to say, it does say somewhere in the code that if it's not expressly allowed, that it is not a permitted use. But that's a little deeper reading. When it doesn't say in there that you can't short-term rental, like, I understand why that happened. And having folks come during the first round of the Planning Commission consideration and speak, and hearing, why they invested here, how they use that as a, how much money they put in, how they furnished it, how it's been good for families to come, who they've hosted, how they vet their tenants. It's a lot that goes into it. And people also ask, well, if you had a neighbor that was running an Airbnb, how would you feel? My neighbor does run an Airbnb, and we've made some great friends through that Airbnb that we see on occasion. We went to dinner with recently, and some of them have bought houses here. So it is an on-ramp. And I'm not, at this point, I can read the tea leaves. I'm not going to continue to advocate for them to continue, but carving out and basically there are 15 now. If we remove B, there will be 0 And it'll go from, and if that's what the council desires, the majority of the council desires for there to be 0, then we remove B. And if that's the case, okay, and I'm going to go along with whatever the will of the larger body is, but that's what we would be doing, de facto ending Airbnbs as they exist now. Short-term rental, sorry, not Airbnb.
But the one line you did mention is a pretty clear line, though. It's not a real complex line. If it's not allowed, it's not allowed. I mean, it was a one-liner. It wasn't a very difficult read. Councilmember Saper.
The fact that they, as I understand it, there'd be nothing precluding them from attempting to then become legitimate short-term rentals.
They would have to move into the property. They would have to own or occupy it.
Or sell.
Correct.
Correct.
All right, further, okay, Councilmember Todd.
Yeah, I do just want to point out, Kansas City just passed some regulations as well, also including owner occupied, that requires the owner to be present in that home and living for 270 days. And so I don't think that our regulations are so far outside of that. We simply are asking that it is a primary residence. And, you know, if people are innovative, they can find ways to make this work as a supplemental income. Most Airbnbs or short-term rentals I've stayed in have been on property with an owner occupancy, and they have been very creative in finding a way to add that supplemental income. That, in and of itself, with our current residents, permanent residents, I think is a way that could boost the economy, because then they have more money in their pockets to spend locally where they already live. And just throwing out as well, even when we talk about, I mean, we are talking about really the elite few. When we are talking about our city, people who are profiting from this, because our city, our average income is under, well, our median income is under 40K. Average income is around 52K, household income. And so again, when I think about who this is benefiting, I just cannot come to terms that that it's benefiting the current permanent residents of North Kansas City on the whole.
Further councilmember comments? If not, okay, this vote, to clarify, is solely on removing non-owner occupied dwelling, which was section B under section 2.
I want
Correct.
to point out one.
That is the vote on the amendment solely,
Let
not
me-
the overall ordinance, not anything else. This is just a vote on whether or not this section is being removed, which is one side over.
Let me highlight one
Oh,
thing
that's
before you
okay.
guys move forward, so make sure everybody understands it clearly. The non-owner occupied dwelling over here, that requirement is only for R1A and R1B. When we move that out, we're only still talking about owner occupied requirement for R1A and R1B, not any other zoning district. Are we on the same page?
Can you repeat that?
Okay, so if we were to take 2B out of this proposed language, how it reads is the short-term rental is permitted in R1A, R1B, R2, 3, 4, 5, CIO, and C1, except that in R1A and R1B, short-term rental is allowed only as follows: owner-occupied dwelling unit, as defined in this, yada, yada. Meaning, you can still have non-owner occupied short-term rental in R2, R3, R4, R5, CIO, C1.
That continues to be okay.
Okay, just want to make sure.
It's still allowed in the places that generally, it sounds like, so far, council
Right.
is okay with the activity.
And if you want to see the zoning map again, not that I would encourage you to, it's a colorful map.
I love a good zoning map.
What it say is we would still allow non-owner occupied in any of this this darker beige and brownish area. Just want to make sure you guys all understand it.
Councilmember Toll.
Okay, so I can't tell from this tiny map, so you just tell me. There's a section of town that's mostly duplexes.
Yeah, where it's dark.
So it's still
orange.
gold.
That would still be
So you could still live in one side of the dwelling and do a short-term rental in the other side of the dwelling, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If it is not in R1A or R1B, the other dwelling, it doesn't have to be owner
I
occupied.
believe those are R2, correct? Yeah, R2.
If you're looking at these. Mhm.
No, north of kind of northwest, keep going a little bit, right there, that area.
This area?
Yeah,
Yeah, they're,
in that little
I
sliver of
believe
North
they're zoned R2.
Those are R2.
Just wanted to double check. Yes, those are R2 area, so these are R2.
So can you
Yeah,
point out on the map by color the areas where non-owner occupied will now be restricted?
It's over here. The very, very light beige area, that's here. And then the second lighter beige area over here, that's by the River Forest and Avenue area here. And over, I believe over here, this area. You can see it.
Oh, all right, give me 1 second here.
And I think this area has a little bit R1B as well.
Okay,
And
there
can
we
I
go.
just
Councilmember
clarify
Todd.
something as well with you? The areas you're pointing out that would be allowable still if we removed that are, generally speaking, the multi-dwelling units. Duplexes, no.
We are not regulating it per building type again.
It is based on the density,
It's,
right?
It's based off the zoning district.
Okay.
So we do have non-conforming structure in the particular zoning district that we would now not allow this such type of building to be built today. For example, I'm saying that as, okay, we have an R1B here. Essentially, with the size of the lot, the width of the lot, you cannot have a duplex on some of the lot, I'm saying that. But there is a duplex, or maybe even a quadplex over there. So that is a non-conforming structure. It's a legally, it could be a legally or not illegally non-conforming situation. Say if it is a legal non-conforming structure on the lot, you have a duplex on the R1B, can you run it as a non-owner occupied? The answer is no, because we're not
Right,
regulating.
because it's
per
based on
building
the zone.
type. It's based off the zone.
All right, we are back to solely voting on, put up the language, please. Removing one slide over there, removing this section regarding non-owner occupied dwelling. So that is the motion. After the motion, whether it passes or fails, we'll go back to debating the entirety of the bill or the ordinance. So with that, we already have a first and second. You ready, Crystal?
I need
Was there not a first and second on that?
yes, but don't you need?
Now I'm getting ready to call the vote here.
Yes, I.
All right. All those in favor of the amendment, please say yes.
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 Opposed? No. Say no.
No.
Motion carries. This is amended.
Okay.
Now we will discuss the amended. Now we will discuss the amended ordinance. Yeah, the ordinance as amended, as I was corrected. Thank you. We don't always go this far, so I got a ordinance as amended. There we go. Okay, now we are back to open debate on all items in the ordinance as well, as amended. Further debate. Seeing none, we have a first and second on it. We've approved the amended, right? So we can go ahead and take a yes/no vote on the amended ordinance. All right, all those in favor of the ordinance as amended, please say yes. Or first reading as amended. First reading as amended, please say yes.
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 Opposed, say no. First reading passes.
Can I read now?
You please take over. You get to read.
An ordinance amending section 5.04.260 fees based on gross annual receipts of the code of the city of North Kansas City, Missouri by adding lodging, bed and breakfast, and lodging short-term rental, amending section 17.12.040 specific use standards by adding a subsection B, lodging short-term rental, amending section 17.36.010 description of uses by adding a use description, lodging, short-term rental, amending section 17.36.030, defined term by adding definitions for non-owner occupied, owner, and owner occupied.
I thought you were going to read the whole thing.
I did. But then I think I need to say as
As amended.
amended and eliminating section 17.12.040.b2b.
All right,
what
so
it
if anyone can
actually
repeat that, then you can make the next motion. No, further discussion. Any council discussion? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I move that bill number 7786 be placed on second and final reading and passes ordinance number 9583. As amended, do I need to say what that?
It
Okay.
has now been said.
17,
There's a second.
section.
Second.
Call the roll, please. There we go.
Councilmember Saper,
Yes.
Councilmember Toll,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
No.
Councilmember Fitzgerald.
Yes.
Councilmember Alvarez,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Todd.
Yes.
6 to 1.
But now she got to read it all again.
An ordinance amending section 5.04.260 fees based on gross annual receipts of the Code of the City of North Kansas City, Missouri by adding lodging, bed and breakfast, and lodging short-term rental. Amending section 17.12.040 specific use standards by adding a subsection B, lodging short-term rental. Amending section 17.36.010 description of uses by adding a use description, lodging short-term rental, and amending section 17.36.030 defined term by adding definitions for non-owner occupied, owner, and owner occupied as amended.
As always, you did a beautiful job of reading that. Thank you. Number 15, reduction of special permit 3 a.m. liquor license from 423, bill number 7784, ordinance number 9581. I don't know if we need much into this one. Generally, over history, we've had a lot of issues with 3 a.m. liquor license, and I think the chief would back me up on that. So the goal has been to reduce the number of 3 a.m. liquor licenses. Companies or businesses don't apply for them again. So no one has been stripped of a license of any sort, but as they go out of business, we just don't issue any more license for that category. And the last one to go out of business, as noted in the packet, was Neon Wild. So now that Neon Wild is out of business, the goal is to not issue a 3 a.m. permit. Further questions for the chief or anybody else?
First reading.
Second?
Second. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carries.
An ordinance amending Title IV alcoholic beverages of the Code of the City of North Kansas City, Missouri by amending paragraph A of section 4.12.380 thereof.
I move that bill number 7784 be placed on second and final reading. Hot mic here. And passes ordinance number 9581.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Saper,
Yes.
Councilmember Toll,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Fitzgerald.
Yes.
Councilmember Alvarez,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Todd.
Yes.
An ordinance amending Title IV alcoholic beverages of the Code of the City of North Kansas City, Missouri by amending paragraph A of section 4.12.380 thereof.
Is Spirits actually actively still in business? They're open? I didn't, no idea. Okay. American Inn Spirits Lounge. All right, number 16, approving accounts due and payable by the city through June 30th, 2023. Oh, I don't have the bill ordinance on
Oh,
mine.
I'm sorry, I thought I wrote it on there. It's bill number 7787, ordinance number 9584.
First reading.
Second.
All in favor, please say yes.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carries.
An ordinance authorizing payment for certain accounts due and payable by the city through June 30th, 2023.
I move that bill number 7787 be placed on second and final reading and passes ordinance number 9584.
Second.
There we go. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Saper,
Yes.
Councilmember Tull,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Fitzgerald,
Yes.
Councilmember Alvarez,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Todd.
Yes.
An ordinance authorizing payment for certain accounts due and payable by the city through June 30th, 2023.
Next item, staff comments. Are there any staff comments?
I have nothing tonight, but I do believe Shu, Dwayne, and Kim.
I was going to say, we can't delay
Comments?
Dwayne off here. Go ahead, please. Yeah, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm filling in for Mr. Anthony Sands tonight. Just a quick update on our storm damage last night. We had excessive damage on pretty much all streets. A lot of the trees were perfectly healthy trees. The wind was so strong it just broke the limbs right off. So our crews were out all day trimming and picking up the leaves. We have one street that's closed. It's on Fayette. It's right off of Armour Road in Fayette. You'll see we have a large limb that's hanging on one of the streetlight wires. I have a call into Evergy. They'll have to remove that before we can open that back up. So hopefully that will be tomorrow, but they're busy all over the place. There's a lot of damage all over. So anyway, another thing I wanted to just make a reminder, this weekend, starting July 8th and 9th, Armour Road will be closed, which is kind of a big deal there at Burlington. Spire is going to be doing some work, and MoDOT's issued some permitting for that, so you will see that closed. So there is a detour that's set, and it's well laid out, so it should be easy to see. They're also going to resume that, excuse me, on the 15th and 16th on Armour Road. There's one more closure on 21st Street, and it's between Clay and Burlington, and that's for Spire as well. So those are the updates on the storm damage and also the road closures.
I will say I appreciate your crew. They've been out there, and
Yeah.
they were out there early. They're always out there, and you wake up to hearing the grinding of trees on the street.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the work your crew's
Yeah,
been doing.
appreciate that. I've got an outstanding staff.
They are fantastic. All right, we're just going down the line here.
Yep, I'll be quick. Two things. The first one is, I mentioned earlier, we do have a Planning Sustainable Places feasibility study rolling out for our Levy area in front of at the front of the riverfront. So we'll have a kickoff meeting in early August and form a steering committee. Some of you might be contacted by staff to request to sit in the steering committee. And the second thing is we are applying for a Safe Streets for All grant that's being administered by the U.S. Department of Transportation. What we're trying to do is to create an action plan for the community to better understanding what's our goal to reach Vision Zero and how to get there.
Thank you. Did she say, please, Chief Freeman, did you have, no, he's head shaking no. Who was the third one?
Comes to me.
There we go.
I just wanted to give the council just two quick updates to some previous actions that are underway. Number one is the YMCA floor. We have been in contact with our insurance company, and they are going to pay for the new rubberized floor over at the YMCA. We are working through what that design looks like, and we're hoping to have a timetable once that design has been approved in conjunction with the YMCA staff of when that floor will actually be replaced, and we'll bring that forward for you. That way everybody will know when that will be repaired. Another quick thing is for River Forest Park, we have officially heard back that unfortunately we were not awarded the Land and Water Conservation Fund grant. That was for $500,000. However, we have been invited to resubmit for that grant for the next funding cycle. So we will be doing that. The window opens in August, and we wouldn't know until next year. But we are hoping to maybe take a more successful go at that particular one. We did receive some pretty good feedback, which I think will help us with a better application for that particular grant.
Thank you. No more staff comments? All right, go around the horn here. Councilmember Saper.
I would like to commend the council and residents who have spoken before the council tonight. Even when there are some serious disagreements, we managed to not be disagreeable. And we continued with that. And I commend the citizens and the council and the mayor and for doing that. And we can become, again, it's a model for moving forward on all things that we do.
Councilmember Dahl.
Yeah, I just wanted to apologize to Kim because I know you did put some work on the RFP, the original RFP that we had said to go with, and I apologize that we're rerouting, and hopefully we caught you before you were too many hours deep in that. But I do think we have a good path forward, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Smith.
I want to say that I appreciate the council and the planning commission for the work and effort and thought that was put into crafting the short-term rental ordinance. While I am not necessarily in agreement with where we ended up, everyone was doing what they think is best for the city and for our residents, so bravo to that. Valerie, thanks for bringing up the tree situation. Dwayne, I think that you guys do a great job keeping an eye on those limbs that overhang trees or streets and and cars and all that will be good to focus on. And if your name happens to float across an agenda on the Parks Board, I would be happy to support that.
Thank you, Councilmember Fitzgerald.
Just thank you to everyone who took the time to come out and speak tonight. Always appreciate getting some light, light shown on items of concern.
Very brief, thank you. Councilmember Alvarez.
Just reiterate what Councilman Fitzgerald just said, too. Appreciate everybody that came out. Also think we need to do a lot more work on trying to correct the transportation issue that we have. I think it's going to be a work in progress, and we need to make sure that we cover the citizens that live here and the residents that depend on that transportation. Also, just thank you for the council and the staff, all the work that they've done on the bike pass. I know it's complicated, it's extensive, and it's a lot of different opinions on it, but I appreciate all the work that's been invested in that. So,
Thank you. Councilmember Clark.
Thank you, Shu, for the work and prioritization of the shared use master plan, might I suggest? I too support Valerie continuing on the Parks Board, so if I see your name, it's thumbs up for me. Thank you, Councilmember Tull, for the upstanding move for clarifying the point-to-point RFP. I appreciate that you came back on something that you were like, wait, I need to fix this. That's a bold move, and I'm so glad you did it. Thanks for setting that example. Thank you to Kim and city staff for your continued work on the grants to support River Forest Park. I know it's not easy. We're having a good time with it, and we got some fun updates coming up in August. And yeah, you're helping residents, even surrounded, that are affected by erosion. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Todd. Keep on a good
Yeah, thanks so much for everyone who came out and spoke and shared. I am always encouraged when people come to a council meeting, whether or not they know that we can do anything about it. This is always a great place to come because maybe we can, maybe we can't, but at least we'll know that it's an issue. So I always just, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for coming. And then thank you so much to the Planning Commission for doing all of that work on short-term rental regulations. I do not envy your position. I attended a meeting or two of those, and I appreciate your hard work on that, so thank you for that. Shout out to the cleanup crew. Always, when I moved to North Kansas City, that was the first thing I noticed was how quickly branches got cleaned up and stuff. I don't think people who live here realize that that's not really something that happens very well in a lot of other communities. So shout out to you. And then shout out to Jesse for sticking with it. I appreciate you in so many ways. I also appreciate that you come up with innovative ideas and to even to the point where it, yes, cause someone else to continue to think about that later. And I think that's always a goal, is that we can have discussions that then sit with us and continue to think on later, because that's how we come up with new ways to move forward instead of doing the status quo. So thanks.
Again, another shout out to the Public Works crew. You know, if you want to see what the damage looks like on trees, you got to get out there in like the first 30 minutes. Otherwise, you come out in the morning and like, that seemed like a strong wind last night, and all I see is a bunch of leaves everywhere because they're out there knocking it out quick. So I appreciate, again, the work you all do. And with that, number 20, a consideration of a request to hold and recess into an executive session as requested by the city councilor to be held on this date on a potential litigation matter pursuant to Missouri Revised Statute 610-0211. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Or
move,
yeah.
I'm sorry, motion.
There we
first.
go. Yeah, approve.
Yeah.
First, we got a second.
Move to approve. Second.
We're just winging it now. Call the roll, please. I at least got that part right tonight.
Councilmember Saper?
Yes.
Councilmember Tull?
yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Fitzgerald?
Yes.
Councilmember Alvarez?
Yes.
Councilmember Clark?
Yes.
Councilmember Todd?
Yes.
Number 21, consideration of a request to hold and recess into an executive session as requested by the mayor to be held on this date on a personnel matter pursuant to Missouri Revised Statute 610-0213. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Saper?
Yes.
Councilmember Tull?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Fitzgerald?
Yes.
Councilmember Alvarez?
Yes.
Councilmember Clark?
Yes.
Councilmember Todd?
Yes.
With that, there'll be no further votes or public business discussed this evening. And here shortly, Channel 2 and YouTube will cut off. There we go. Have a good night. Oh.